Picture this. You're standing on the shores of an ancient ocean, but the water stretches endlessly in every direction, covering lands that would one day become Kansas, Nebraska, and Colorado. The air is thick and humid, more like breathing in a tropical greenhouse than anything we know today. Towering ferns sway in the warm breeze, and somewhere in the distance, the earth trembles under the footsteps of creatures so massive they dwarf modern elephants like toys. Welcome to the Cretaceous Period, Earth's ultimate dinosaur paradise. This wasn't just another chapter in prehistoric history. This was a grand finale, the climactic peak of dinosaur dominance that had been building for over 100 million years. If the age of dinosaurs was a symphony, the Cretaceous was its thunderous crescendo. But here's what makes this story absolutely fascinating. While everyone thinks they know about dinosaurs, most people have no idea that the Cretaceous period represents something far more extraordinary than just big reptiles stomping around. This was a time when our planet underwent one of the most dramatic transformations in its entire history, setting the stage for modern life as we know it. Over the next few episodes, we're going to dive deep into this incredible world, exploring not just the famous giants and TR like Tyrannosaurus rexaceratops, but the complete ecosystem that supported the most diverse collection of life forms our planet had ever seen. We'll uncover how flowering plants revolutionized the landscape, how the first birds took to the skies, and why the oceans teemed with monsters that make modern great whites look like minnows. Today, we're starting at the beginning, painting the grand picture of what made the Cretaceous so special. By the time we're done, you'll understand why paleontologists consider this period the absolute pinnacle of dinosaur evolution, and why its dramatic ending, 66 million years ago, changed everything forever. The Cretaceous period began approximately 145 million years ago and lasted until that fateful asteroid impact 66 million years ago. That's a span of nearly 8 million years, longer than the entire age of mammals that followed. To put that in perspective, if the entire history of dinosaurs was compressed into a single year, the Cretaceous would represent the final 4 months, the time when everything reached its absolute peak. During this vast expanse of time, Earth looked nothing like the world we inhabit today. Global temperatures soared to levels that would make our current climate debate seem quaint. There were no ice caps at the poles, no frozen tundra, no snow-capped mountains. Instead, lush forests extended all the way to what we now call the Arctic Circle. Palm trees grew in Alaska, and tropical vegetation thrived in regions that today experience harsh winters. The most striking difference was the sea level, which stood an astounding 200 to 300 meters higher than today. Imagine the entire state of Florida completely submerged, along with vast portions of Europe, Asia, and North America. These weren't just coastal floods we're talking about. Entire continents were carved up by shallow, warm seas that created archipelagos where solid land masses exist today. These inland seas were absolutely crucial to understanding Cretaceous life. The western interior seaway, for instance, split North America nearly in half, creating a tropical waterway that stretched from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean. This wasn't some narrow channel either. At its widest point, this ancient sea was broader than the modern Mediterranean, and its warm, nutrient-rich waters supported an explosion of marine life unlike anything seen before or since. The high sea levels weren't just a random occurrence. They were the result of the planet's supercharged greenhouse climate. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels were 3 to 4 times higher than today, creating a natural greenhouse effect that trapped heat and drove up global temperatures. The polar regions, which today are frozen wastelands, enjoyed temperate climates similar to modern-day California or the Mediterranean coast. This greenhouse world had profound implications for life on Earth. Without ice caps to lock up water, more of the planet's surface was habitable. The expanded coastlines and shallow seas created countless new ecological niches, while the warm, humid climate supported unprecedented biodiversity. It was like someone had turned Earth into a massive tropical paradise, and life responded by exploding into every possible form and function. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Cretaceous greenhouse was its stability. Unlike our modern climate, which can shift dramatically over relatively short periods, the Cretaceous climate remained consistently warm and humid for tens of millions of years. This stability allowed evolutionary processes to fine-tune organisms to an extraordinary degree, leading to the incredible diversity and specialization we see in Cretaceous fossils. The continents themselves were still in motion during this time, continuing the breakup of the ancient supercontinent Pangaea that had begun in the Triassic. By the Cretaceous, this process was well underway, with the Atlantic Ocean continuing to widen as North America and Europe drifted apart, and South America and Africa following suit. The separation wasn't complete, however, and many land connections still existed, allowing for the exchange of species between continents that are now isolated by thousands of miles of ocean. This continental drift had enormous implications for dinosaur evolution and distribution. As land masses separated, populations became isolated, leading to the evolution of distinct regional faunas. The dinosaurs of North America began to diverge from their European cousins, while the southern continents developed their own unique assemblages of species. This geographical isolation was one of the driving forces behind the incredible diversity of Cretaceous dinosaurs. The geological processes shaping the planet during the Cretaceous weren't limited to continental drift. Volcanic activity was intense, with massive eruptions regularly reshaping the landscape. The formation of the Rocky Mountains was underway, as was the creation of many other mountain ranges around the world. These geological upheavals created new habitats and climate zones, further driving evolutionary innovation. One of the most significant geological features of the Cretaceous was the development of vast chalk deposits, particularly in Europe. These white, powdery rocks are actually composed of the microscopic skeletons of countless tiny marine organisms called coccolithophores. These deposits are so characteristic of the period that they gave the Cretaceous its name, derived from the Latin word creta, meaning chalk. The formation of these chalk deposits tells us something important about Cretaceous oceans. The seas were incredibly productive, teeming with microscopic life that formed the base of complex food webs. When these tiny organisms died, their calcium carbonate shells settled to the ocean floor in such vast quantities that they formed layers hundreds of feet thick. The famous White Cliffs of Dover are just one example of these Cretaceous chalk formations that can still be seen today. The marine ecosystems of the Cretaceous were perhaps even more spectacular than the terrestrial ones. The warm, shallow seas provided ideal conditions for an incredible array of life forms. Massive marine reptiles ruled as apex predators, including the serpentine plesiosaurs with their impossibly long necks, the dolphin-like ichthyosaurs that could dive to crushing depths, and the fearsome mosasaurs, giant marine lizards that could grow larger than modern sperm whales. These oceanic giants weren't alone in the water. The seas swarmed with ammonites, spiral-shelled relatives of modern squids and octopi that came in an bewildering array of shapes and sizes. Some were tiny, no bigger than a coin, while others grew to the size of truck tires. Many developed bizarre unwound shells that defied the typical spiral pattern, creating shapes that looked more like abstract art than functional homes for living animals. The success of marine life during the Cretaceous was closely linked to the evolution of microscopic plankton. For the first time in Earth's history, modern groups of planktonic organisms began to dominate the oceans. These tiny floating creatures formed the base of marine food webs, supporting everything from filter-feeding shellfish to massive predatory reptiles. The evolution of these planktonic communities was one of the most important biological innovations of the Cretaceous, fundamentally reshaping ocean ecosystems in ways that persist to this day. But while the oceans were undergoing their own revolution, it was on land where the Cretaceous truly earned its reputation as the age of dinosaurs. By this time, dinosaurs had been evolving for over 100 million years, and they had reached a level of diversity and specialization that was simply breathtaking. Every ecological niche that could possibly be filled by a large terrestrial vertebrate was occupied by some form of dinosaur. The herbivorous dinosaurs of the Cretaceous were particularly spectacular. The long-necked sauropods, which had dominated the Jurassic, continued to thrive, but they were joined by entirely new groups that approached plant eating in completely different ways. The duck-billed hadrosaurs developed sophisticated dental batteries capable of processing the toughest plant materials, while the heavily armored ankylosaurs turned themselves into living tanks, bristling with spikes and covered in bony plates. Perhaps most impressive were the ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs epitomized by the famous Triceratops. These magnificent creatures evolved an incredible array of horns, frills, and facial decorations that served both for defense against predators and for display to potential mates. The variety of ceratopsian skull ornamentation was so extensive that new species are still being discovered regularly, each with its own unique combination of horns and frills. The predatory dinosaurs of the Cretaceous were equally impressive. The Tyrannosaurs, with their massive skulls and bone-crushing jaws, represented the ultimate evolution of the large terrestrial predator. But they weren't alone at the top of the food chain. The Spinosaurs developed semi-aquatic lifestyles, becoming the first dinosaurs known to spend significant time in the water. The Dromaeosaurs, better known as raptors, perfected pack hunting techniques and developed some of the most sophisticated predatory behaviors ever seen in dinosaurs. What made Cretaceous dinosaur communities so special wasn't just their individual magnificence, but the way they functioned together as complete ecosystems. These weren't random collections of giant reptiles stumbling around a prehistoric landscape. They were finely tuned biological communities where every species had its role, where predators and prey had co-evolved sophisticated strategies for survival, and where competition and cooperation shaped behavior in ways that would make modern ecologists weep with envy. The diversity wasn't limited to the famous giants either. Small dinosaurs filled countless ecological niches, from tiny insectivores no bigger than modern songbirds to medium-sized omnivores that probably lived much like modern mammals. Many of these smaller dinosaurs were already developing features that would eventually lead to the evolution of birds, including feathers, hollow bones, and sophisticated respiratory systems. Speaking of feathers, this brings us to one of the most revolutionary discoveries in paleontology, the realization that many dinosaurs were actually covered in these structures. For decades, we imagined dinosaurs as scaly, lizard-like creatures, but the Cretaceous has revealed a far more colorful and dynamic reality. Fossil evidence now shows us that everything from tiny raptors to massive tyrannosaurs sported various types of feathery coverings. These weren't necessarily the flight feathers we see on modern birds, mind you. Many dinosaurs had simple, hair-like proto-feathers that served as insulation in the greenhouse world's surprisingly variable climates. Others developed more complex feather structures for display purposes, creating elaborate plumage that would have made peacocks jealous. The psychological impact of this discovery cannot be overstated. We've had to completely reimagine these ancient giants, transforming them from cold-blooded, sluggish reptiles into warm-blooded, active, and often brilliantly colored creatures that were far more bird-like than anyone had previously imagined. This feathered revelation ties directly into another Cretaceous breakthrough, the evolution of true flight. While primitive bird-like creatures had appeared in the Jurassic, it was during the Cretaceous that powered flight really took off. If you'll pardon the expression, the skies above those ancient landscapes weren't empty. They were filled with an incredible diversity of flying creatures, from tiny early birds no bigger than sparrows to massive pterosaurs with wingspans that dwarfed modern aircraft. The pterosaurs of the Cretaceous were particularly spectacular. These weren't dinosaurs, technically speaking, but they were close relatives that had mastered the art of aerial domination. Some species developed wingspans exceeding 30 feet, making them the largest flying animals that have ever existed. Imagine looking up and seeing something the size of a small airplane soaring overhead, its massive wings barely flapping as it rode the thermal currents above the warm Cretaceous seas. These giants weren't just impressive for their size either. Recent discoveries have revealed that many pterosaurs were covered in a fur-like coating that helped them regulate their body temperature. They had sophisticated brains capable of processing the complex sensory information required for flight, and some species developed elaborate head crests that likely served both aerodynamic and display functions. The diversity of pterosaur forms during the Cretaceous was absolutely staggering. with species adapted for everything from fishing in shallow lagoons to soaring over open oceans to stalking prey on foot across terrestrial landscapes. But let's return to the ground for a moment, because that's where some of the most fascinating Cretaceous innovations were taking place. One of the most significant developments was the evolution and explosive diversification of flowering plants. This might not sound as exciting as giant predatory dinosaurs, but the appearance of flowers and fruits fundamentally transformed terrestrial ecosystems in ways that are still shaping our world today. Before the Cretaceous, plant life was dominated by conifers, ferns, and other primitive groups that reproduced through spores or simple seeds. These plants were certainly successful, but they lacked the sophisticated reproductive strategies that would come to characterize modern ecosystems. The evolution of flowers changed everything. Suddenly, plants could form partnerships with insects, creating mutually beneficial relationships that drove both groups to new heights of diversity and specialization. The impact of this floral revolution rippled through every level of the ecosystem. Herbivorous dinosaurs had to adapt to new types of plant foods, many of which were more nutritious than their predecessors. The development of fruits and nuts provided concentrated energy sources that could support more complex food webs. Meanwhile, the explosion of insect diversity that accompanied flowering plants created new opportunities for small predators and helped drive the evolution of early mammals and birds. This brings us to another often overlooked aspect of Cretaceous ecosystems: the incredible diversity of smaller life forms that shared the world with the dinosaurs. While the giants grab all the headlines, the Cretaceous was also a time of remarkable innovation among insects, spiders, early mammals, amphibians, and other groups that are often forgotten in popular depictions of the era. The insects of the Cretaceous were particularly impressive. Many modern insect groups first appeared during this time, including advanced forms of beetles, flies, wasps, and butterflies. Some of these insects were enormous by today's standards, with dragonflies sporting wingspans measured in feet rather than inches. The coevolution between these insects and flowering plants created feedback loops that drove both groups to extraordinary levels of diversity and specialization. Early mammals, while still small and often overshadowed by their dinosaurian contemporaries, were undergoing their own evolutionary experiments during the Cretaceous. These weren't the tiny mouse-like creatures that popular culture often depicts. Many were sophisticated predators, specialized herbivores, or even semi-aquatic forms that had carved out unique ecological niches. Some developed gliding membranes for moving between trees, while others evolved specialized teeth for processing particular types of food. The amphibians and reptiles of the Cretaceous were equally diverse and often bizarre. Giant frogs the size of beach balls lurked in tropical swamps, their massive mouths capable of swallowing small dinosaurs. Crocodilians experimented with body plans that would seem absurd today, including fully terrestrial forms that galloped on long legs, and even herbivorous species that developed leaf-shaped teeth for processing plant matter. This incredible diversity wasn't limited to terrestrial environments either. the freshwater systems of the Cretaceous supported their own spectacular communities of life. Rivers and lakes teemed with giant fish, some of which grew larger than modern great whites. Massive soft-shelled turtles, some weighing over 5,000 pounds, dominated aquatic environments alongside smaller but equally fascinating forms. The integration of all these different groups into functioning ecosystems was perhaps the Cretaceous period's greatest achievement. These weren't simple communities where big animals ate smaller ones. They were complex webs of interaction where flowering plants supported specialized insects, which in turn supported small predators, which provided food for medium-sized dinosaurs, which were hunted by massive predators, all while being pollinated, dispersed, and decomposed by an intricate network of smaller organisms. The sophistication of these ecological relationships is evident in the fossil record through various forms of evidence. We find dinosaur nests with carefully arranged eggs suggesting complex parental care behaviors. We discover bite marks on bones that tell stories of predator-prey interactions and scavenging behaviors. We uncover fossil plants with insect damage that reveals the intimate relationships between herbivorous insects and their host plants. Perhaps most remarkably, we're beginning to understand that many dinosaurs lived in complex social groups with sophisticated behaviors. Evidence suggests that some species engaged in elaborate courtship rituals, maintained long-term pair bonds, and even exhibited what we might recognize as play behavior. The discovery of dinosaur bone beds containing individuals of all ages suggests that some species lived in multi-generational herds, with older animals possibly teaching younger ones important survival skills. The climate stability of the Cretaceous allowed these complex behaviors and relationships to evolve and persist over geological time scales. Unlike periods of rapid environmental change that favored generalists and opportunists, the long-term stability of Cretaceous conditions rewarded specialization and fine-tuning. This is why we see such incredible diversity in dinosaur forms, with species adapted to incredibly specific ecological niches and lifestyle requirements. The global nature of dinosaur success during the Cretaceous is also worth emphasizing. These weren't regional phenomena limited to particular continents or climate zones. Dinosaurs dominated terrestrial ecosystems from the polar regions to the equator, from coastal plains to mountainous highlands. They adapted to every conceivable terrestrial environment, developing specialized forms for deserts, forests, swamps, grasslands, and even semi-aquatic habitats. This worldwide dominance was facilitated by the continued connections between continents that allowed for species exchange and migration. While the breakup of Pangaea was well underway, land bridges and island chains still connected many regions, allowing dinosaur lineages to spread across vast distances and colonize new territories. The result was a global dinosaur empire that spanned all continents and encompassed an incredible range of forms and functions. The success of Cretaceous ecosystems also depended on the development of increasingly sophisticated nutrient cycling systems. The warm, humid climate promoted rapid decomposition and nutrient turnover, while the diversity of plant and animal life created complex food webs that efficiently captured and redistributed energy throughout the system. This biological efficiency helped support the enormous biomass of large dinosaurs that characterized many Cretaceous ecosystems. As we examine the fossil record of this remarkable period, we begin to see patterns that help explain why the Cretaceous represented the absolute pinnacle of dinosaur evolution. The combination of stable climate, high atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, elevated sea levels, and continental configurations created conditions that were uniquely favorable for large terrestrial vertebrates. It was a perfect storm of environmental errors to reach factors that allowed Dinosa unprecedented levels of diversity, abundance, and ecological dominance. But this golden age of dinosaurs wasn't destined to last forever. Even as Cretaceous ecosystems reached their peak complexity and sophistication, forces were already at work that would ultimately bring this incredible chapter of Earth's history to a dramatic and sudden end. The evidence for this coming catastrophe was already being written in stone quite literally, as volcanic forces deep within the Earth began stirring in ways that would reshape the entire planet. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Right now, in the height of the Cretaceous Golden Age, life was reaching heights of complexity and beauty that seem almost impossible to modern eyes. The sheer scale of Cretaceous biodiversity becomes even more staggering when we consider the marine realm. While massive dinosaurs dominated the land, the oceans hosted their own spectacular cast of giants and oddities. The ammonites alone tell an incredible story of evolutionary experimentation. These cephalopods, relatives of modern squid and octopus, had been around for hundreds of millions of years. But during the Cretaceous, they exploded into forms that defied every rule of shell architecture. Some ammonites maintained the classic spiral shell design that had served their ancestors well, but others broke free from convention entirely. Picture shells that unwound into loose coils, looking more like ancient springs than protective homes. Others twisted into bizarre shapes that resembled corkscrews, paper clips, or even tangled knots of rope. These weren't evolutionary mistakes or dead ends. Each bizarre form represented a successful solution to some specific ecological challenge, whether it was achieving neutral buoyancy in different water depths, creating more efficient swimming dynamics, or simply finding a way to avoid the crushing jaws of marine predators. The success of these experimental shell designs tells us something profound about Cretaceous oceans. They were so rich in resources and so stable in their conditions that evolution could afford to be playful, to experiment with forms that might seem risky or inefficient in harsher times. It was biological abundance that allowed for biological artistry. But the ammonites were just one thread in a marine tapestry of incredible complexity. The seas swarmed with creatures that would make modern marine biologists weep with wonder. Giant clams the size of bathtubs filtered nutrients from the warm waters. Massive sea urchins, some sporting spines longer than baseball bats, crawled across the seafloor like living pincushions. Delicate sea lilies, actually animals rather than plants despite their name, swayed in underwater currents like fields of alien flowers. The predators in these ancient seas were nothing short of spectacular. The plesiosaurs had evolved into two distinct strategies for marine domination. Some developed incredibly long necks with tiny heads, perfect for darting into schools of fish or ambushing prey from below. Others went in the opposite direction, evolving massive heads and short, powerful necks that could deliver bone-crushing bites to large prey. These different body plans allowed multiple species to coexist in the same waters by targeting different prey items and hunting in different ways. Even more impressive were the mosasaurs, marine lizards that grew to lengths that would make modern sperm whales look modest. These weren't just scaled-up versions of land lizards that happened to live in water. They were sophisticated marine predators with paddle-like limbs, shark-like tails, and skulls designed for processing large prey. Some species developed specialized teeth for crushing shellfish, while others evolved blade-like fangs for slicing through the flesh of other marine reptiles. The diversity of feeding strategies among Cretaceous marine reptiles was absolutely remarkable. Some were filter feeders that strained tiny organisms from the water. Others were bottom feeders that used their long necks to probe crevices in the sea floor. Still others were active pursuit predators that could chase down fast-swimming fish in open water. This specialization allowed multiple large predators to coexist in the same marine ecosystems without direct competition, creating food webs of incredible complexity. The success of these marine ecosystems was built on a foundation of microscopic life that was undergoing its own revolution. The Cretaceous saw the rise of modern phytoplankton communities, tiny floating plants that formed the base of marine food webs. These microscopic organisms were so abundant and so productive that their remains literally built mountains. The chalk cliffs that give the Cretaceous its name are composed almost entirely of the calcium carbonate shells of these tiny marine plants. This explosion of marine productivity had profound effects on global climate and ocean chemistry. The massive amounts of carbon being pulled out of the atmosphere by marine organisms helped regulate global temperatures, while the burial of organic matter in ocean sediments created vast deposits of oil and gas that we still exploit today. In a very real sense, our modern industrial civilization is powered by the fossilized remains of Cretaceous marine life. The connection between marine and terrestrial ecosystems during the Cretaceous was far more intimate than in modern times. With sea levels so high and continents so fragmented, most land masses were never far from the ocean. This created countless opportunities for interaction between marine and terrestrial life forms. Coastal environments were incredibly diverse, supporting unique communities that combined elements from both realms. These transitional environments were particularly important for the evolution of flight. Many of the most spectacular pterosaurs were coastal specialists, using their enormous wingspans to soar over vast expanses of shallow sea while hunting for fish. The development of powered flight in pterosaurs reached its absolute peak during the Cretaceous, with some species achieving wingspans that exceeded anything that has flown before or since. The largest pterosaurs were truly awe-inspiring creatures. With wingspans approaching 40 feet, they were essentially living aircraft, capable of staying aloft for hours or even days at a time, But size wasn't their only impressive feature. These giants possessed hollow bones filled with air sacs, making them remarkably light for their size. Their wings were supported by a single, enormously elongated finger, creating a membrane that was both flexible and incredibly strong. Recent discoveries have revealed that many pterosaurs were covered in a coat of primitive fur, suggesting they were warm-blooded creatures capable of maintaining high activity levels. Their brains were remarkably large and sophisticated, with well-developed regions for processing visual information and coordinating complex flight maneuvers. Some species developed elaborate crests that may have served as air rudders during flight, while others possessed specialized feeding apparatus for different hunting strategies. The diversity of pterosaur forms during the Cretaceous was extraordinary. Some were delicate, long-winged soarers that could ride thermal currents for vast distances. Others were powerful flyers with broad wings designed for active pursuit of prey. Still others were more terrestrial in their habits, using their wings primarily for short-distance travel between feeding areas on the ground. But perhaps most remarkable of all were the filter-feeding pterosaurs, creatures that evolved flamingo-like feeding apparatus for straining small organisms from shallow water. These animals represent one of the most unusual evolutionary experiments in the history of vertebrates, combining powered flight with a feeding strategy more commonly associated with whales or certain seabirds. The success of pterosaurs in Cretaceous skies was complemented by the parallel evolution of true birds. While pterosaurs dominated large-bodied aerial niches, birds were rapidly diversifying into smaller size classes and developing increasingly sophisticated flight capabilities. The birds of the Cretaceous were far more diverse than previously imagined, with species adapted for everything from diving in marine environments to hunting insects in forest canopies. Many Cretaceous birds still retain teeth, giving them a distinctly reptilian appearance that bridged the gap between their dinosaurian ancestors and modern avian forms. Some species developed specialized teeth for different types of prey, while others evolved powerful beaks capable of cracking nuts or processing tough plant materials. The diversity of feeding strategies among Cretaceous birds rivaled that of modern avian communities. The relationship between birds and their dinosaurian relatives during the Cretaceous was complex and fascinating. Rather than representing a simple evolutionary transition from one group to another, the boundary between dinosaurs and birds was remarkably fluid. Many dinosaurs possessed bird-like features, including feathers, hollow bones, and sophisticated respiratory systems, while early birds retained many distinctly dinosaurian characteristics. This blurring of boundaries extended to behavior as well. Evidence suggests that many dinosaurs engaged in activities we typically associate with birds, including elaborate courtship displays, careful nest construction, and attentive parental care. Some dinosaurs even developed brooding behaviors, using their feathered bodies to incubate eggs in much the same way modern birds do. The discovery of feathered dinosaurs has revolutionized our understanding of Cretaceous terrestrial ecosystems. Rather than the drab, scaly creatures of popular imagination, many dinosaurs were brilliantly colored animals with complex plumage patterns used for display, camouflage, or thermoregulation. The psychological impact of this revelation cannot be overstated. We now know that Cretaceous forests were filled with creatures that were as visually spectacular as any modern tropical bird. The evidence for dinosaur coloration comes from remarkable fossils that preserve not just the impressions of feathers, but the actual cellular structures responsible for producing color. By analyzing these microscopic features, scientists can determine with surprising accuracy what colors many dinosaurs actually displayed. The results have been stunning, revealing creatures with iridescent plumage, bold stripes, and complex patterns that would make modern peacocks envious. This new understanding of dinosaur appearance has profound implications for how we interpret their behavior and ecology. Bright colors and elaborate ornamentation are typically associated with complex social behaviors, sophisticated mating rituals, and high levels of parental investment. The presence of such features in many dinosaurs suggests that Cretaceous ecosystems supported behavioral complexity that rivaled anything seen in modern vertebrate communities. The social behaviors of Cretaceous dinosaurs were indeed remarkably sophisticated. Evidence from fossil trackways suggests that many species traveled in organized herds with specific age-related groupings. Some trackways show evidence of coordinated movement patterns that suggest communication and cooperation between individuals. Others preserve evidence of what appears to be protective behavior, with larger individuals positioned between smaller ones and potential sources of danger. The discovery of dinosaur nesting sites has provided even more dramatic evidence for complex social behaviors. Some species constructed elaborate communal nesting grounds where dozens of individuals would return year after year to lay their eggs. These sites show evidence of careful nest construction with precisely arranged eggs and elaborate temperature regulation systems. Some nests contain evidence of multiple clutches from the same female, suggesting extended breeding seasons and high reproductive investment. Perhaps most remarkably, several dinosaur species show evidence of extended parental care that lasted well beyond hatching. Young dinosaurs found associated with adult remains show signs of being fed and protected by their parents for months or even years after emerging from their eggs. This level of parental investment is typically associated with high intelligence and complex social organization. The intelligence of many dinosaurs appears to have been considerably higher than previously assumed. Brain-to-body size ratios in some species approached those of modern birds and mammals, suggesting cognitive abilities that would have supported complex problem-solving, social learning, and perhaps even basic tool use. The discovery of dinosaur species with enlarged brain regions associated with sensory processing and motor control suggests that many were capable of sophisticated behaviors that we're only beginning to understand. The hunting strategies employed by predatory dinosaurs were particularly impressive. Rather than simple ambush predators or scavengers, many species show evidence of coordinated pack hunting, sophisticated pursuit strategies, and even what appears to be tactical planning. Some trackway sites preserve evidence of multiple predators working together to isolate and bring down large prey animals, suggesting levels of cooperation and communication that rival those of modern social carnivores. The herbivorous dinosaurs of the Cretaceous were equally impressive in their behavioral sophistication. Many species show evidence of complex migration patterns following seasonal changes in plant growth and availability. Some appear to have engaged in competitive displays for access to prime feeding areas, while others developed cooperative feeding strategies that allowed multiple species to exploit the same resources without direct competition. The plant communities that supported these diverse herbivore assemblages were themselves undergoing revolutionary changes. The evolution and rapid diversification of flowering plants fundamentally transformed terrestrial ecosystems in ways that are still shaping our world today. Before flowers appeared, plant reproduction was largely dependent on wind or water for moving pollen between individuals. The evolution of flowers allowed plants to recruit animals as partners in reproduction, creating mutually beneficial relationships that drove both groups to new heights of diversity and specialization. The impact of this floral revolution extended far beyond simple pollination relationships. Flowering plants evolved fruits and seeds with sophisticated dispersal strategies that allowed them to colonize new habitats with unprecedented efficiency. Some developed fleshy fruits that attracted animals to eat and dispersed their seeds. Others evolved elaborate hooks, barbs, or sticky surfaces that allowed them to hitchhike on passing animals. Still others developed explosive seed pods that could launch their offspring considerable distances. The nutritional quality of flowering plants was generally higher than that of their predecessors, providing herbivorous dinosaurs with more energy-rich food sources. This may have contributed to the evolution of larger body sizes and more active lifestyles in many herbivorous species. The seasonal production of fruits and nuts created pulses of high-quality food that could support population booms and complex migration patterns. The coevolution between flowering plants and their animal partners created feedback loops that drove both groups to extraordinary levels of diversity. As plants evolved more sophisticated flowers to attract specific pollinators, insects evolved increasingly specialized anatomy and behavior to exploit particular flower types. This arms race of specialization created the incredible diversity of both flowering plants and insects that characterizes modern-ect communities of the terrestrial ecosystems. The ends Cretaceous were truly spectacular. Many modern insect groups first appeared during this time, including advanced forms of beetles, flies, wasps, and the first primitive butterflies and moths. Some of these insects were enormous by today's standards, with dragonflies sporting wingspans that exceeded those of small birds. The diversity of insect feeding strategies exploded during the Cretaceous, with species specializing on everything from nectar and pollen to wood, leaves, other insects, and even dinosaur blood. The relationship between insects and dinosaurs was complex and multifaceted. Many dinosaurs show evidence of insect bite marks, suggesting that blood-feeding insects were already well established. Some dinosaurs may have developed mutual relationships with certain insects, allowing them to remove parasites or clean wounds in exchange for easy meals. The discovery of dinosaur coprolites containing large quantities of insect remains suggests that many species regularly consumed insects as part of their diet. The pollination services provided by insects allowed flowering plants to colonize virtually every terrestrial habitat. During the Cretaceous, forests became increasingly complex, with multiple canopy layers supporting different plant communities and their associated animal life. Grasslands began to appear for the first time, creating new opportunities for grazing animals and their predators. Wetland communities diversified dramatically, with specialized plant and animal assemblages adapted to different water conditions and seasonal cycles. This diversification of plant communities had profound effects on dinosaur evolution and ecology. Different plant communities supported different assemblages of herbivorous dinosaurs, each adapted to particular feeding strategies and nutritional requirements. The result was an incredible mosaic of ecosystems, each supporting its own unique combination of species and ecological relationships. The stability of Cretaceous climate conditions allowed these complex ecosystems to develop and persist over geological timescales. Unlike periods of rapid environmental change that favor generalists and opportunists, the long-term stability of Cretaceous conditions rewarded specialization and fine-tuning. This is why we see such incredible diversity in dinosaur forms, with species adapted to incredibly specific ecological niches and behavioral requirements. The global nature of this diversification is particularly impressive. Dinosaurs and their associated ecosystems weren't limited to particular regions or climate zones. They dominated terrestrial environments from the poles to the equator, adapting to conditions ranging from humid tropical forests to seasonally dry woodlands. The continued connections between continents allowed for species exchange and migration, creating a truly global dinosaur empire that encompassed virtually every terrestrial habitat on Earth. But even as these magnificent ecosystems reached their peak of complexity and beauty, the seeds of their destruction were already being sown. Deep beneath the surface of the Indian subcontinent, massive volcanic forces were beginning to stir. Halfway around the world, a mountain-sized asteroid was beginning its final approach through the darkness of space. The golden age of dinosaurs was approaching its dramatic and violent end, though none of the magnificent creatures living through these final moments could possibly have known what was coming. The stage was set for one of the most catastrophic events in Earth's history, an event that would bring the Cretaceous period to a sudden and devastating conclusion. But that story of destruction and renewal will have to wait for our next episode. For now, we can only marvel at the incredible world that existed during this pinnacle of dinosaur evolution, a world of such beauty and complexity that it challenges our imagination and fills us with wonder at the incredible creativity of life itself. The complexity of Cretaceous ecosystems becomes even more breathtaking when we examine the intricate relationships that bound these communities together. This wasn't simply a collection of magnificent creatures coexisting in the same space. These were finely tuned biological machines where every component played a crucial role in maintaining the whole system. Consider the relationship between the massive sauropod dinosaurs and the forests they inhabited. These colossal herbivores, some weighing as much as modern blue whales, weren't just passive consumers of vegetation. They were active ecosystem engineers, shaping the very landscapes they lived in. Their massive footsteps created temporary pools that became breeding grounds for amphibians and insects. Their feeding habits opened up forest canopies, allowing sunlight to reach the forest floor and encouraging the growth of new plant communities. The waste products of these giants created nutrient-rich patches that supported specialized plant assemblages. Some flowering plants may have evolved specifically to take advantage of dinosaur dung, developing rapid germination strategies that allowed them to exploit these temporary nutrient bonanzas before they were depleted. The seeds of certain plants may have required passage through dinosaur digestive systems to germinate properly, creating obligate relationships between plants and their massive dispersers. These relationships extended far beyond simple predator-prey or plant-herbivore interactions. The Cretaceous world was filled with examples of what ecologists call facilitation, where one species creates conditions that benefit others. Large dinosaurs created wallows and dust baths that became microhabitats for smaller animals. Their movements through dense vegetation created game trails that were used by countless other species. Even their deaths provided resources, as massive carcasses could support scavenger communities for months. The scavenging networks of the Cretaceous were particularly sophisticated. When a giant sauropod died, it didn't simply rot away unnoticed. Instead, it became the center of a complex web of interactions involving multiple species of carnivorous dinosaurs, early mammals, insects, and microorganisms. Different species specialized in accessing different parts of the carcass, from the powerful jaws of Tyrannosaurs that could crack open massive bones to extract marrow, to smaller predators that could access meat in tight spaces, to insects that processed the remaining soft tissues. These scavenging assemblages may have played crucial roles in nutrient cycling, breaking down massive amounts of organic matter and redistributing nutrients throughout the ecosystem. The bones of large dinosaurs, with their high calcium content, may have been particularly important resources for smaller animals that needed these minerals for their own skeletal development or egg production. The social complexity of many dinosaur species added another layer of sophistication to these ecosystems. Evidence suggests that some species maintained territories that they defended against intruders, creating spatial patterns that influenced the distribution of other species. Territorial displays may have served multiple functions, not only establishing dominance hierarchies within species, but also providing information to other animals about resource availability and danger levels. The communication systems employed by dinosaurs appear to have been remarkably sophisticated. While we can't directly observe their vocalizations, the structure of their skulls and respiratory systems suggests that many species were capable of producing complex sounds. Some had elaborate air-filled crests that may have functioned as resonating chambers, allowing them to produce low-frequency calls that could travel for miles. Others possessed throat sacs that could have been inflated for visual displays or sound production. These communication networks may have created what ecologists call acoustic landscapes, where different species use different frequency ranges to avoid interference with each other's signals. The dawn chorus in a Cretaceous forest may have been as complex and beautiful as anything heard in modern tropical rainforests, with dozens of species contributing their voices to a symphony of prehistoric sound. The migration patterns of Cretaceous dinosaurs added yet another dimension to ecosystem complexity. Many species appear to have undertaken regular seasonal movements, following resource availability across vast landscapes. These migrations may have been triggered by changes in plant phenology, with herbivorous dinosaurs tracking the seasonal production of their preferred food plants. Predatory dinosaurs may have followed these herbivore migrations, creating moving ecosystems that traveled hundreds or even thousands of miles each year. The scale of these migrations was probably spectacular. Imagine vast herds of duck-billed hadrosaurs moving across the landscape like living rivers, their calls echoing across the countryside as they communicated with each other during their journey. The ground would have trembled under the weight of countless feet, while overhead, pterosaurs and early birds followed the herds, taking advantage of the insects and small animals disturbed by their passage. These migration routes may have connected distant ecosystems, facilitating gene flow between populations and preventing the genetic isolation that can lead to local extinctions. They also created predictable pulses of resources that other species could exploit. Scavengers may have followed the migration routes, feeding on animals that died during the journey. Plants along migration corridors may have evolved to take advantage of the massive amounts of fertilizer provided by passing herds. The aquatic components of Cretaceous ecosystems were equally complex and interconnected. The extensive river systems that drained the continents supported their own spectacular communities of life. Massive crocodilians, some reaching lengths that dwarfed modern saltwater crocodiles, patrolled these waterways alongside giant freshwater sharks and enormous fish that could swallow smaller dinosaurs whole. These aquatic predators weren't confined to the water, however. Many species were semi-aquatic, moving freely between terrestrial and aquatic environments. This created unique opportunities for interaction between land and water-based food webs. Terrestrial dinosaurs that came to drink at rivers and lakes faced predation from aquatic giants, while aquatic species could venture onto land to exploit terrestrial resources. The boundaries between different ecosystem types were particularly dynamic during the Cretaceous. The high sea levels and warm, humid climate created extensive wetland systems that supported unique communities, combining elements from terrestrial, freshwater, and marine environments. These transitional zones were hotspots of biological diversity, supporting species that were adapted to exploit resources from multiple habitat types. Coastal environments were especially rich and complex. The extensive shallow seas that covered much of the continents created vast areas of warm, nutrient-rich water that supported incredible biodiversity. These areas served as nurseries for many marine species, while also providing feeding grounds for terrestrial and aerial predators. Pterosaurs may have spent much of their time soaring over these coastal waters, using their keen eyesight to spot schools of fish or floating carcasses. The tidal zones of Cretaceous coastlines were particularly dynamic environments. The extreme tidal ranges created by high sea levels meant that vast areas were alternately submerged and exposed, creating unique challenges and opportunities for the organisms that lived there. Some dinosaurs may have specialized in exploiting tidal zone resources, timing their feeding activities to coincide with low tides when marine prey was stranded in tidal pools. The seasonal cycles of the Cretaceous world added temporal complexity to these spatial patterns. While the overall climate was warm and stable, there were still seasonal variations that influenced biological activity. Many dinosaurs may have timed their reproductive cycles to coincide with peak resource availability, leading to synchronized breeding seasons that created pulses of juvenile animals entering the ecosystem. These reproductive pulses may have had cascading effects throughout the food web. Predators may have timed their own reproductive cycles to coincide with peak availability of young prey. Scavengers may have concentrated their activities during breeding seasons when mortality rates were highest. Even plant communities may have responded to these biological cycles, with some species evolving to produce fruits and seeds when young animals were most abundant to serve as dispersers. The disease dynamics of Cretaceous ecosystems were probably equally complex. The close proximity of many species, particularly during migration periods or at resource concentration points like water sources, would have facilitated the transmission of pathogens. Some diseases may have played important roles in regulating population sizes and maintaining ecosystem balance. However, the high biodiversity of Cretaceous ecosystems may have also provided natural buffers against catastrophic disease outbreaks. The presence of multiple species filling similar ecological roles meant that if one species was severely affected by disease, others could potentially compensate for its loss. This redundancy may have been one of the factors that allowed Cretaceous ecosystems to maintain their stability and complexity over such long time periods. The evolutionary pressures operating in these complex ecosystems were intense and multifaceted. Species weren't just adapting to their physical environment, but to a constantly changing biological environment shaped by the activities of countless other species. This created evolutionary arms races where predators and prey, parasites and hosts and competitors were constantly evolving new strategies to gain advantages over each other. These evolutionary pressures led to some truly remarkable adaptations. Some herbivorous dinosaurs developed sophisticated dental batteries that could process the toughest plant materials, while others evolved elaborate defensive structures like the massive frills of ceratopsians or the armor plating of ankylosaurs. Predatory dinosaurs countered with increasingly powerful jaws, sharper claws, and more sophisticated hunting strategies. The co-evolutionary relationships between different groups created feedback loops that drove both morphological and behavioral innovation. As flowering plants evolved more sophisticated chemical defenses, herbivorous dinosaurs developed better detoxification systems. As prey animals became faster and more alert, predators evolved better sensory systems and more efficient locomotion. These ongoing evolutionary battles created the incredible diversity of forms and functions that characterizes Cretaceous fossils. The role of climate in shaping these evolutionary processes cannot be overstated. The warm, stable conditions of the Cretaceous greenhouse world provided a benign backdrop that allowed evolutionary experimentation to flourish. Species could afford to invest in elaborate ornamental features, complex behaviors, and highly specialized ecological roles because they didn't need to constantly adapt to changing environmental conditions. This climate stability also allowed for the development of highly co-evolved relationships that might have been disrupted by environmental instability. The intimate partnerships between flowering plants and their insect pollinators, for example, required time to develop and fine-tune. Similarly, the complex social behaviors observed in many dinosaur species likely required stable environmental conditions that allowed these behaviors to be learned and transmitted between generations. The geographic patterns of Cretaceous biodiversity were shaped by the ongoing breakup of Pangaea and the resulting changes in continental positions and ocean circulation patterns. As continents drifted apart, populations became isolated and began evolving in different directions. This geographic isolation was one of the primary drivers of the incredible diversity we see in Cretaceous fossils. However, the separation wasn't complete, and many land bridges and island chains still connected different continents. These connections allowed for episodic exchange of species between land masses, creating complex biogeographic patterns that are still being unraveled by paleontologists. Some groups, like the Tyrannosaurs, appear to have originated in Asia and later dispersed to North America. Others, like certain groups of sauropods, may have evolved in South America and later spread to other continents. The marine connections between continents were even more extensive, allowing for the global distribution of many marine species. The warm, shallow seas that covered much of the continental areas created ideal conditions for the dispersal of marine organisms. Many groups of marine reptiles, for example, show remarkably similar forms across different ocean basins, suggesting that they were able to disperse freely between different marine environments. The volcanic activity that characterized much of the Cretaceous period added another layer of complexity to ecosystem dynamics. While massive volcanic eruptions could be locally devastating, they also created new habitats and opportunities for colonization. Volcanic ash provided nutrients that could stimulate plant growth, while new volcanic islands created stepping stones for species dispersal across ocean basins. Some species may have been particularly well adapted to exploiting the opportunities created by volcanic activity. Pioneer species that could quickly colonize disturbed areas may have played important roles in ecosystem recovery following volcanic eruptions. The ability to disperse rapidly and establish populations in new areas may have been a key adaptation that allowed some lineages to survive and thrive during periods of volcanic activity. The chemical composition of Cretaceous atmospheres and oceans also influenced ecosystem structure and function. The high carbon dioxide levels that characterized the Cretaceous greenhouse world had direct effects on plant physiology, generally increasing growth rates and allowing plants to grow larger and faster. than under modern atmospheric conditions. This enhanced plant productivity may have been one of the factors that allowed Cretaceous ecosystems to support such enormous biomasses of herbivorous dinosaurs. The chemistry of Cretaceous oceans was also different from modern conditions, with higher levels of dissolved nutrients and different patterns of ocean circulation. These chemical differences supported different types of marine food webs, with massive blooms of microscopic organisms providing the base for complex marine ecosystems. The periodic deposition of organic-rich sediments suggests that these marine ecosystems were incredibly productive, supporting vast numbers of marine organisms. The integration of all these factors, from climate and chemistry to geography and evolution, created the conditions that allowed the Cretaceous to become the pinnacle of dinosaur evolution. It was a unique moment in Earth's history when all the pieces came together to create something truly extraordinary. The warm, stable climate provided a benign backdrop. The high productivity of both terrestrial and marine ecosystems provided abundant resources. The complex geography created opportunities for both isolation and connection. The long time scales involved allowed for the evolution of sophisticated adaptations and relationships. The result was a world of almost unimaginable beauty and complexity. Forests filled with flowering trees hosted dinosaurs with brilliant plumage and complex social behaviors. Vast herds of herbivores moved across landscapes dotted with volcanic mountains and shallow seas. Overhead, giant pterosaurs soared on thermals rising from sun-warmed plains, while below, massive marine reptiles hunted in crystal-clear tropical waters. This wasn't just the age of dinosaurs. It was the age of biological experimentation on a scale that has never been equaled before or since. Life was exploring every possible way of being alive, creating forms and functions that stretch our imagination and challenge our understanding of what's possible in the natural world. The ecosystems of the Cretaceous were more than just collections of species. They were integrated biological communities where every component played a role in maintaining the whole. The loss of any major component would have had cascading effects throughout the entire system. The herbivorous dinosaurs weren't just consumers of plants. They were ecosystem engineers that shaped the very landscapes they inhabited. The predatory dinosaurs weren't just killers. They were population regulators that maintained the balance between different species. The plants weren't just passive producers of oxygen and food. They were active participants in complex relationships with animals, providing resources in exchange for services like pollination and seed dispersal. The insects weren't just minor components of the ecosystem. They were essential links in food webs and crucial partners in plant reproduction. Even the microorganisms played vital roles, decomposing organic matter and cycling nutrients through the system. This level of integration and interdependence made Cretaceous ecosystems both incredibly robust and potentially fragile. Their complexity provided multiple pathways for energy and nutrients to flow through the system, creating redundancy that could buffer against local disturbances. But this same complexity also meant that major disruptions could have unpredictable and far-reaching consequences. The stability of these systems over tens of millions of years is testament to their sophistication and resilience. They weathered volcanic eruptions, climate fluctuations, and sea level changes while maintaining their basic structure and function. They supported the evolution of increasingly complex and specialized organisms, while maintaining the ecological relationships that allowed these organisms to coexist. But this remarkable stability was about to be put to the ultimate test. Forces were already at work that would challenge these ecosystems in ways they had never experienced before. The volcanic processes that had been simmering beneath the Indian subcontinent were about to explode into action, creating environmental disruptions on a scale that would test the limits of ecosystem resilience. At the same time, somewhere in the depths of space, a mountain-sized asteroid was beginning its final approach toward Earth. This cosmic projectile, traveling at speeds that defied comprehension, carried with it the power to end not just individual lives or species, but entire ecosystems that had taken millions of years to develop. The collision of these two catastrophic events would create a perfect storm of environmental destruction that would bring the golden age of dinosaurs to a sudden and violent end. The complex ecosystems that had flourished for so long would be reduced to rubble in a matter of months. The magnificent creatures that had ruled the earth for over 160 million years would vanish almost overnight, leaving behind only their fossilized remains as testimony to their former glory. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, in these final moments of the Cretaceous Golden Age, life continued in all its magnificent complexity. Dinosaur parents tended their nests and taught their young the skills they would need to survive. Vast herds continued their ancient migration routes across landscapes that had remained unchanged for millions of years. Pterosaurs soared over seas that teemed with life, while deep in the forests, flowers bloomed and insects buzzed in partnerships that had been millions of years in the making. None of these creatures could have known that their world was about to end. They lived in the eternal present of all wild creatures, focused on the immediate challenges of finding food, avoiding predators, and raising their young. They had no way of knowing that they were witnessing the final chapters of one of the most remarkable periods in Earth's history. The beauty and complexity of their world was about to be tested in ways that would reveal both its incredible sophistication and its ultimate vulnerability. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic transitions in the history of life on Earth, a transition that would end one chapter of evolution and begin another. But that story of destruction and renewal awaits us in our next episode. For now, we can only stand in awe of the incredible world that existed during these final moments of the Cretaceous Period. It was a world that pushed the boundaries of what life could achieve, creating ecosystems of such beauty and complexity that they continued to inspire wonder and amazement millions of years after their destruction. The legacy of these remarkable ecosystems lives on in the fossil record, in the oil and gas deposits they created, and in the evolutionary innovations that survived their collapse to shape the modern world. Every bird that flies overhead carries within its genes the heritage of the feathered dinosaurs that soared through Cretaceous skies. Every flower that blooms maintains the partnerships with insects that were forged in Cretaceous forests. The Cretaceous period represents more than just the pinnacle of dinosaur evolution. It represents a pinnacle of biological creativity itself, a time when life explored possibilities that may never be seen again on Earth. Understanding this remarkable period helps us appreciate not just the incredible diversity of prehistoric life, but the amazing creativity and resilience of life itself. As we prepare to explore the dramatic end of this golden age in our next episode, we carry with us a deeper appreciation for the incredible complexity and beauty that characterized the Cretaceous world. It was truly the pinnacle of dinosaur evolution, a time when life reached heights of sophistication and diversity that continue to amaze and inspire us today. The intricate web of relationships that defined Cretaceous ecosystems extended into realms we're only beginning to understand. Recent discoveries have revealed that the boundaries between different groups of organisms were far more fluid than we ever imagined. The distinction between dinosaurs and birds, for instance, wasn't the clear evolutionary line we once thought it was. Instead, it was a gradual transition filled with creatures that challenged our very definitions of what made something a dinosaur versus what made it a bird. Consider the remarkable Microraptor, a small dinosaur that lived in the trees of ancient China. This creature possessed 4 wings, with flight feathers on both its arms and legs, creating a configuration unlike anything alive today. It couldn't fly in the way modern birds do, but it could glide from tree to tree with remarkable precision. Microraptor represents just one example of the evolutionary experimentation that was happening throughout the Cretaceous, as life explored every possible way to conquer the aerial realm. The forests where creatures like Microraptor lived were themselves undergoing revolutionary changes. The rise of flowering plants had created entirely new types of forest structures with multiple canopy layers that supported different communities of life. The uppermost canopy was dominated by tall conifers and early hardwood trees, creating a green ceiling that filtered sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor below. Beneath this upper canopy, a middle story of smaller flowering trees provided fruits and nectar that supported an incredible diversity of flying creatures. Primitive butterflies and moths fluttered between the blossoms, their wings catching the filtered sunlight in brilliant flashes of color. Early bees and wasps buzzed from flower to flower, their bodies dusted with pollen as they went about their essential work of plant reproduction. The understory was perhaps the most dynamic layer of all, filled with ferns, cycads, and the first true shrubs. This zone was constantly changing as tree falls created gaps that allowed different plant communities to establish themselves. Small dinosaurs scurried through this undergrowth, hunting for insects, small mammals, and the seeds and fruits that had become increasingly common as flowering plants diversified. Even the forest floor was alive with activity. Primitive ants had begun to appear, creating some of the first truly social insect colonies. These early ant societies were already showing sophisticated behaviors, including agriculture, as some species cultivated fungus gardens to feed their colonies. The presence of these social insects had profound effects on soil chemistry and plant growth, creating feedback loops that influenced the entire forest ecosystem. The decomposition processes in these forests were incredibly efficient, with warm temperatures and high humidity, creating ideal conditions for rapid breakdown of organic matter. Fungi played crucial roles in this process, forming vast underground networks that connected different plants and facilitated the exchange of nutrients. Some of these fungal networks may have extended for miles, creating communication systems that allowed plants to share resources and even warn each other of approaching herbivores. The herbivorous dinosaurs that fed in these forests had evolved incredibly sophisticated feeding strategies to deal with the new types of plants they encountered. Many had developed complex dental arrangements that functioned like living food processors, capable of breaking down tough plant fibers and extracting maximum nutrition from their food. Some species had even evolved symbiotic relationships with gut bacteria that helped them digest the complex chemicals found in flowering plants. The predatory dinosaurs that hunted in these forests were equally specialized. Many had evolved enhanced sensory capabilities that allowed them to navigate through dense vegetation while tracking prey. Some species developed exceptional hearing that could detect the subtle sounds of movement in the undergrowth. Others evolved enhanced color vision that helped them spot camouflaged prey animals against the complex visual background of the forest. The vertical complexity of these forests created numerous microhabitats, each supporting its own unique assemblage of species. The high canopy was home to pterosaurs and early birds that rarely descended to the ground. The middle canopy supported small dinosaurs that were equally at home, climbing through branches or gliding between trees. The understory was dominated by ground-dwelling species that occasionally climbed into the lower branches. Each of these zones had its own climate, its own light conditions, and its own set of ecological opportunities. The seasonal patterns in these forests were subtle but important. While there were no harsh winters in the Cretaceous greenhouse world, there were still wet and dry seasons that influenced plant growth and animal behavior. Many flowering plants timed their reproductive cycles to coincide with optimal conditions, creating seasonal pulses of flowers, fruits, and seeds that rippled through the entire ecosystem. During the flowering season, the forests would have been spectacular displays of color and activity. Countless species of plants would burst into bloom simultaneously, creating carpets of flowers that attracted massive numbers of insects. The air would have been filled with the sounds of buzzing, chirping, and calling as countless creatures went about the business of reproduction and feeding. The fruit season would have been equally dramatic, as trees and shrubs produced massive crops of fleshy fruits designed to attract animal dispersers. Large dinosaurs would have gorged themselves on these seasonal bonanzas, their movements spreading seeds across vast distances. Some plants may have evolved fruits specifically sized and colored to attract particular dinosaur species, creating intimate co-evolutionary relationships that benefited both partners. The connections between these forest ecosystems and the broader landscape were maintained through the movements of animals. Many species served as biological bridges, carrying nutrients, seeds, and even smaller organisms between different habitat types. A dinosaur that fed in riverside vegetation might deposit seeds miles away in an upland forest, facilitating plant dispersal across landscape boundaries. The rivers that drained these forested landscapes were themselves complex ecosystems that supported remarkable communities of life. These waterways weren't just channels for water flow, they were ribbons of habitat that connected distant regions and supported their own unique assemblages of species. The margins of these rivers were particularly rich, supporting dense vegetation that provided food and shelter for countless animals. Many rivers supported populations of massive crocodilians that had evolved far beyond their modern relatives in terms of size and ecological diversity. Some species remained aquatic predators, similar to modern crocodiles, but others had evolved into fully terrestrial forms that galloped across the landscape on long legs. Still others had become herbivorous, developing flat teeth, perfect for processing aquatic vegetation. The fish communities in these rivers were equally spectacular. Some species grew to enormous sizes, with predatory fish reaching lengths that rivaled modern sharks. These giants shared the waters with smaller but equally remarkable species, including some of the first fish to develop complex social behaviors and even primitive forms of parental care. The amphibians of the Cretaceous were particularly impressive, including frogs that grew to the size of small dinosaurs. These giants weren't just scaled-up versions of modern frogs. They were highly specialized predators with massive mouths and powerful jaws that could tackle prey much larger than themselves. Some species may have been ambush predators that waited motionless in shallow water for unwary dinosaurs to come within striking range. The reptile communities of the Cretaceous were incredibly diverse, including not just dinosaurs, but also numerous groups that are less well known today. Early snakes were beginning to appear, though they were quite different from modern forms and still retained tiny legs. Lizards were diversifying rapidly, with some species developing gliding membranes that allowed them to move between trees, while others were evolving specialized feeding apparatus for different types of prey. The mammal communities of the Cretaceous were far more diverse than most people realized. While they were generally small compared to the dinosaurs that dominated large-bodied niches, mammals had already begun to explore a remarkable range of ecological strategies. Some were specialized insectivores, with sophisticated sensory apparatus for hunting in the dark. Others were herbivorous forms that had developed complex teeth for processing different types of plant materials. Some of the most remarkable Cretaceous mammals were semi-aquatic species that lived along rivers and lakes. These creatures had evolved paddle-like tails and webbed feet that made them efficient swimmers, while their dense fur provided insulation in the water. Some species may have been capable of diving to considerable depths in search of aquatic prey. The social behaviors of Cretaceous mammals were already quite sophisticated, with evidence suggesting that some species lived in complex family groups with extended parental care. Some may have developed primitive forms of communication using scent marking and vocalizations to coordinate group activities and maintain social bonds. The integration of all these different groups into functioning ecosystems required incredibly complex networks of interaction. Predator-prey relationships formed the backbone of these networks, but they were supplemented by countless other types of interactions, including competition, mutualism, parasitism, and facilitation. The result was biological communities of unprecedented complexity and stability. The energy flow through these ecosystems was remarkably efficient, with multiple pathways connecting primary producers to top predators. The high productivity of flowering plants provided abundant resources at the base of terrestrial food webs, while the warm, nutrient-rich waters supported equally productive aquatic communities. The connections between terrestrial and aquatic systems allowed for the transfer of energy and nutrients between different habitat types. The nutrient cycling in these ecosystems was equally sophisticated, with rapid turnover of organic matter, ensuring that essential elements remained available to support continued productivity. The warm, humid climate promoted rapid decomposition, while the activities of countless organisms, from bacteria to large dinosaurs, facilitated the movement of nutrients through the system. The resilience of these ecosystems was remarkable, with multiple mechanisms in place to buffer against disturbances. The high diversity meant that if one species was affected by disease or environmental change, others could potentially compensate for its loss. The complex network of interactions meant that disruptions in one part of the system could be absorbed by other parts without causing system-wide collapse. The geographic extent of these complex ecosystems was truly global. Similar patterns of diversity and complexity can be found in Cretaceous deposits from every continent, suggesting that the entire planet was supporting biological communities of unprecedented sophistication. The warm climate and high sea levels had created a world where complex ecosystems could flourish virtually everywhere. The evolutionary innovations that emerged from these ecosystems would have lasting impacts on the history of life. The flowering plants that first appeared in the Cretaceous would go on to dominate terrestrial ecosystems for the next 100 million years. The birds that evolved from dinosaurian ancestors would survive the coming catastrophe and diversify into the incredible variety of forms we see today. Even the mammals, though still small and relatively inconspicuous, were developing the characteristics that would allow them to inherit the Earth after the dinosaurs disappeared. The marine ecosystems of the late Cretaceous were reaching their own peaks of complexity and diversity. The warm, shallow seas that covered much of the continents supported marine communities unlike anything seen before or since. The base of these marine food webs was formed by incredible blooms of microscopic organisms, including the coccolithophores, whose calcium carbonate shells would eventually form the chalk deposits that give the Cretaceous its name. These microscopic organisms were so abundant that they literally clouded the water, creating conditions that were simultaneously highly productive and quite different from modern marine environments. The high productivity supported vast numbers of larger organisms, from tiny zooplankton to massive marine reptiles. The entire ocean ecosystem was shifted toward much higher biomass levels than we see in modern seas. The ammonites that dominated many Cretaceous marine environments had evolved into an incredible array of forms, many of which challenged our understanding of how shells could be constructed. Some species had developed shells with complex internal chambers that provided sophisticated buoyancy control, allowing them to move up and down in the water column with remarkable precision. Others had evolved shells with elaborate spines and ridges that may have served both defensive and hydrodynamic functions. The predatory marine reptiles of the Cretaceous were truly spectacular creatures that had evolved sophisticated adaptations for life in the water. The mosasaurs in particular had developed streamlined body forms and powerful swimming apparatus that made them incredibly efficient marine predators. Some species had evolved specialized teeth for different types of prey, creating ecological partitioning that allowed multiple large predators to coexist in the same marine environments. The plesiosaurs had taken a different evolutionary approach, developing incredibly long necks that could be maneuvered with snake-like flexibility. These necks weren't just for show. They were sophisticated hunting apparatus that allowed these predators to surprise prey while keeping their large bodies at a distance. The muscular and neural control systems required to operate these necks were remarkably complex. The marine ecosystems also supported incredible diversity among smaller organisms. Countless species of bivalves, gastropods, and other invertebrates had evolved specialized feeding strategies that allowed them to exploit different resources in the marine environment. Some were filter feeders that strained microscopic organisms from the water. Others were deposit feeders that processed sediments for organic matter. Still others were predators or scavengers that fed on larger prey items. The coral reefs of the Cretaceous were quite different from modern reefs, but they were equally diverse and productive. Many were built by rudest bivalves rather than corals, creating reef structures with different architectures but similar ecological functions. These reefs supported incredible diversity of associated organisms, creating underwater gardens of remarkable beauty and complexity. The chemistry of Cretaceous oceans was significantly different from modern conditions, with higher levels of dissolved carbon dioxide creating more acidic conditions. Paradoxically, this didn't seem to inhibit the growth of shell-forming organisms. Instead, many groups flourished in these conditions, suggesting that ancient marine ecosystems were adapted to chemical conditions that would be challenging for modern marine life. The global circulation patterns of Cretaceous oceans were also different, with the warm climate and different continental configurations creating circulation patterns that distributed heat and nutrients in ways that supported high productivity in many regions. The lack of polar ice caps meant that there were no cold, dense water masses sinking to the ocean depths, creating very different patterns of deep water circulation. These different circulation patterns may have contributed to periodic episodes of ocean anoxia, where deep waters became depleted of oxygen. Rather than being catastrophic events, these episodes may have been normal parts of Cretaceous ocean cycles, with marine ecosystems adapted to cope with periodic oxygen depletion. The organic matter that accumulated during these episodes would eventually become some of the world's major oil deposits. The connections between marine and terrestrial ecosystems were much more extensive during the Cretaceous than they are today. The high sea levels meant that most continental areas were never far from the ocean, creating extensive coastal environments where marine and terrestrial ecosystems interacted. Many dinosaurs may have been regular visitors to coastal environments, feeding on marine organisms or using coastal resources for nesting. The pterosaurs were particularly important links between marine and terrestrial ecosystems. Many species were adapted for fishing, using their excellent eyesight and aerial mobility to locate schools of fish in the clear, shallow waters. These aerial predators could cover vast distances, potentially moving nutrients and energy between widely separated ecosystems. The seasonal patterns in marine ecosystems were probably quite different from modern patterns, with the warm, stable climate creating more subtle seasonal cycles. However, there were still patterns of productivity that may have been driven by changes in ocean circulation, nutrient availability, or biological cycles. These patterns would have influenced the timing of reproduction, migration, and other biological activities in marine organisms. The deep-sea environments of the Cretaceous are less well known, but they were probably quite different from modern deep-sea communities. The lack of cold, dense water masses may have created deep-sea environments that were much warmer and less oxygen-rich than modern deep seas. The organisms that lived in these environments would have been adapted to very different conditions than modern deep-sea fauna. The integration of marine ecosystems with global climate systems was particularly important during the Cretaceous. The high productivity of marine ecosystems played crucial roles in carbon cycling, with massive amounts of carbon being incorporated into marine organisms and eventually buried in marine sediments. This biological carbon pump helped regulate atmospheric carbon dioxide levels and maintain the stability of the Cretaceous greenhouse climate. The volcanic activity that characterized much of the Cretaceous period had important effects on marine ecosystems as well as terrestrial ones. Volcanic ash provided nutrients that could stimulate marine productivity, while volcanic gases could alter ocean chemistry in ways that affected marine organisms. Some volcanic episodes may have triggered massive blooms of marine organisms, while others may have caused temporary disruptions to marine food webs. The overall picture that emerges from studying Cretaceous marine ecosystems is one of incredible productivity, diversity, and complexity. These weren't simple communities dominated by a few large predators, but sophisticated biological networks involving countless species and intricate ecological relationships. The success of these marine ecosystems was built on the same foundations that supported terrestrial ecosystems: stable climate, high productivity, and long periods of evolutionary fine-tuning. Paco, the late Cretaceous, represents the culmination of over 100 million years of ecosystem development and evolutionary innovation. Both marine and terrestrial communities had reached levels of complexity and integration that may never have been equaled in Earth's history. The diversity of species, the sophistication of ecological relationships, and the efficiency of energy and nutrient cycling had all reached remarkable peaks. This biological success was possible because of the unique environmental conditions that characterized the Cretaceous greenhouse world. The warm, stable climate provided a benign backdrop that allowed evolutionary processes to fine-tune organisms and ecosystems to extraordinary degrees of specialization and efficiency. The high atmospheric carbon dioxide levels supported enhanced plant productivity, while the elevated sea levels created vast areas of shallow, productive marine habitat. The geographic configuration of continents during the late Cretaceous was also optimal for supporting high biodiversity. The ongoing breakup of Pangaea had created numerous isolated land masses where endemic species could evolve while still maintaining enough connections to allow for species exchange and prevent complete isolation. The result was a global pattern of biodiversity that combined regional endemism with broad biogeographic connections. The timing was also perfect for biological innovation. The Cretaceous came after evolution had had time to develop sophisticated biological solutions to environmental challenges. But before the environmental catastrophes that would reset evolutionary clocks and force life to begin again with simpler forms. It was the perfect moment in Earth's history for life to reach its maximum complexity and diversity. But this golden age was not destined to last forever. Even as ecosystems reached their peak of sophistication, forces were already at work that would test their resilience to the breaking point. The massive volcanic eruptions that had been building in intensity throughout the late Cretaceous were about to reach catastrophic levels. The Deccan traps of India were preparing to unleash floods of lava that would cover an area larger than France and pump enormous quantities of greenhouse gases and toxic compounds into the atmosphere. At the same time, somewhere in the outer reaches of the solar system, a cosmic intruder was beginning its final approach toward Earth. This asteroid, perhaps 10 kilometers across and traveling at speeds of over 20 kilometers per second, carried kinetic energy equivalent to billions of nuclear weapons. Its impact would release more energy in a few seconds than all the volcanic eruptions in Earth's history combined. The collision of these two catastrophic events would create environmental conditions unlike anything that had occurred during the entire Phanerozoic era. The sophisticated ecosystems that had taken millions of years to develop would be subjected to environmental stresses that exceeded their capacity to adapt or respond. The complex networks of ecological relationships that had provided stability and resilience would become vulnerabilities as cascading failures propagated through interconnected biological communities. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic transitions in the history of life on Earth. The golden age of dinosaurs was about to end not with the gradual decline that had characterized previous mass extinctions, but with sudden, catastrophic collapse that would remove entire groups of organisms from the planet in a geological instant. But even as we anticipate this coming catastrophe, we must remember that the story of the Cretaceous is fundamentally one of biological triumph rather than tragedy. For nearly 80 million years, life had explored possibilities that may never be seen again on Earth. The ecosystems that flourished during this time represent peaks of biological achievement that continue to inspire wonder and amazement. The innovations that emerged during the Cretaceous would have lasting impacts that extended far beyond the period itself. The flowering plants that first diversified during this time would go on to dominate terrestrial ecosystems for the next 100 million years. The birds that evolved from dinosaurian ancestors would survive the coming catastrophe and eventually diversify into over 10,000 modern species. Even the mammals, still small and inconspicuous during the Cretaceous, were developing the genetic and developmental innovations that would allow them to inherit the Earth. The legacy of Cretaceous ecosystems lives on in countless ways. The fossil fuels that power our modern civilization are largely derived from the organic matter that accumulated in Cretaceous seas and swamps. The basic patterns of plant-animal interactions that characterize modern ecosystems were largely established during the Cretaceous radiation of flowering plants and their associated pollinators. Even our modern understanding of evolution and ecology has been profoundly shaped by studying the incredible diversity and complexity of Cretaceous life. As we prepare to explore the dramatic end of this golden age, we carry with us a deeper appreciation for what was lost when the Cretaceous world came to its sudden end. It wasn't just individual species or even entire groups like non-avian dinosaurs that disappeared. It was an entire way of organizing life on Earth, a biological experiment in complexity and diversity that had reached heights that may never be seen again. The Cretaceous period truly represents the pinnacle of dinosaur evolution, but it was much more than that. It was the pinnacle of biological complexity itself, a time when life pushed the boundaries of what was possible and created ecosystems of breathtaking beauty and sophistication. Understanding this remarkable period helps us appreciate not just the incredible diversity of prehistoric life, but the amazing potential of life itself when given the right conditions and sufficient time to flourish. The story of how this magnificent world came to its dramatic end and what emerged from its ashes awaits us in our next chapter. But for now, we can only stand in awe of the incredible biological symphony that played out during the Cretaceous period when Earth truly became a planet of wonders beyond our wildest imagination. The sheer magnitude of what we've been exploring starts to sink in when you consider the time scales involved. We're not talking about ecosystems that lasted a few thousand years or even a few million years. The peak complexity we've been describing persisted for tens of millions of years, creating a stability that allowed biological relationships to develop depths of interdependence that seem almost impossible by today's standards. Think about what this means in practical terms. A predator-prey relationship that we might observe in a modern ecosystem for a few decades had millions of generations to fine-tune itself. During the Cretaceous, the result was evolutionary arms races that produced adaptations of stunning sophistication. Herbivorous dinosaurs didn't just evolve bigger teeth to process tougher plants. They developed dental batteries with hundreds of individual teeth arranged in precise grinding surfaces that could be continuously replaced as they wore down. Some species could process plant material with an efficiency that puts modern herbivores to shame. The predators that hunted these well-defended herbivores responded with equally impressive innovations. The Tyrannosaurs didn't just evolve bigger jaws and sharper teeth. They developed bite forces that could crush the bones of their prey, allowing them to access nutrient-rich marrow that other predators couldn't reach. Their skulls became precision-engineered bone-crushing machines, with every curve and ridge optimized for delivering devastating bites while absorbing the tremendous forces generated by their own attacks. But perhaps even more remarkable were the smaller-scale evolutionary innovations that often go unnoticed. The feathers that adorned many dinosaurs weren't just simple insulation or crude flight surfaces. They were sophisticated structures with complex branching patterns that could create iridescent colors, intricate patterns, and dynamic displays. Some dinosaurs possessed feathers that could change position and orientation, creating behavioral displays of remarkable complexity and beauty. The sensory systems of Cretaceous animals had evolved to extraordinary levels of sophistication. Some dinosaurs possessed hearing so acute that they could detect the footsteps of approaching predators from miles away. Others developed eyesight so sharp that they could spot potential prey or mates across vast landscapes. The brains that processed this sensory information were remarkably advanced, with some species possessing brain-to-body ratios that approached those of modern birds and mammals. These neurological advances supported behavioral complexity that rivaled anything seen in modern animal communities. Evidence suggests that some dinosaurs engaged in complex social rituals, including elaborate courtship displays, territorial competitions, and cooperative hunting strategies. Some species appear to have developed cultural behaviors that were passed from parents to offspring, creating traditions that persisted across multiple generations. The communication systems employed by these ancient creatures were equally sophisticated. While we can't directly hear the sounds they made, the structure of their skulls and respiratory systems suggests that many species were capable of producing complex vocalizations. Some had elaborate resonating chambers that could amplify low-frequency calls, allowing them to communicate across vast distances. Others possessed specialized structures that may have produced high-frequency sounds for close-range communication. The acoustic landscape of a Cretaceous ecosystem would have been incredibly rich and complex. Different species probably used different frequency ranges to avoid interference, creating layered soundscapes where dozens of different calls could occur simultaneously without confusion. The dawn chorus in a Cretaceous forest may have been as complex and beautiful as anything heard in modern tropical rainforests. The migration patterns that characterized many Cretaceous animals added another dimension to ecosystem complexity. These weren't simple movements from one feeding area to another, but sophisticated journeys that connected distant ecosystems and facilitated the flow of energy and nutrients across continental landscapes. Some herbivorous dinosaurs may have undertaken migrations that spanned thousands of miles, following seasonal changes in plant productivity and creating moving ecosystems that traveled across vast territories. The scale of these migrations was probably breathtaking. Imagine vast herds numbering in the hundreds of thousands moving across ancient landscapes, their passage creating temporary rivers of life that connected otherwise isolated habitats. The ground would have shaken under the weight of countless feet, while clouds of dust marked their progress across the horizon. Overhead, pterosaurs and early birds would have followed these moving feasts, taking advantage of the insects and small animals disturbed by the passage of the herds. These migration routes served as biological highways that facilitated genetic exchange between distant populations and prevented the isolation that could lead to local extinctions. They also created predictable resource pulses that other species could exploit. Scavengers learned to follow migration routes, feeding on animals that died during the journey. Plants along migration corridors evolved to take advantage of the massive amounts of fertilizer provided by passing herds. The seasonal timing of these migrations was precisely calibrated to environmental cues that had remained constant for millions of years. Changes in day length, temperature, or plant phenology triggered departure times that had been honed by countless generations of natural selection. The result was biological clockwork of remarkable precision, with different species timing their movements to take advantage of optimal conditions and avoid competition with other migrating groups. The aquatic dimensions of Cretaceous ecosystems were equally spectacular and complex. The extensive river systems that drained the continents supported communities of freshwater life that were unlike anything seen today. Massive crocodilians, some reaching lengths that dwarfed modern saltwater crocodiles, shared these waterways with giant freshwater sharks and enormous bony fish that could swallow smaller dinosaurs whole. But these aquatic predators weren't confined to the water. Many species were semi-aquatic, moving freely between terrestrial and aquatic environments in ways that created unique opportunities for ecological interaction. Some crocodilians had evolved long legs that allowed them to gallop across land at surprising speeds, while others had developed herbivorous lifestyles with specialized teeth for processing aquatic vegetation. The boundaries between aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems were remarkably fluid during the Cretaceous. High sea levels and extensive river systems created vast areas of wetland habitat that supported unique communities, combining elements from both realms. These transitional zones were hotspots of biological diversity, supporting species that were adapted to exploit resources from multiple habitat types. Coastal environments were particularly dynamic and productive. The extensive shallow seas created by high global sea levels provided vast areas of warm, nutrient-rich water that supported incredible marine biodiversity. These areas served as nurseries for many marine species, while also providing feeding grounds for terrestrial and aerial predators. The tidal ranges in these shallow seas were extreme, creating vast areas that were alternately submerged and exposed, generating unique challenges and opportunities for the organisms that lived there. Some dinosaurs may have specialized in exploiting these tidal zone resources, timing their feeding activities to coincide with low tides when marine prey was stranded in tidal pools. Others may have been regular visitors to coastal environments, feeding on seaweed, shellfish, or the carcasses of marine animals washed up on beaches. The discovery of dinosaur tracks in what were once tidal flats suggests that these interactions between terrestrial and marine realms were common and important. The marine ecosystems themselves were reaching unprecedented levels of productivity and complexity. The warm, shallow seas that covered much of the continental areas were essentially vast tropical lagoons that supported marine communities unlike anything seen before or since. The water was so clear and warm that photosynthetic organisms could thrive at depths that would be impossible in modern oceans, creating underwater forests of marine plants and algae. These aquatic plant communities supported incredible diversity of marine herbivores, from tiny gastropods that grazed on algae to massive marine reptiles that fed on seagrass meadows. The herbivorous marine reptiles were particularly remarkable, representing evolutionary experiments in marine plant eating that have no modern parallels. Some developed specialized teeth and digestive systems for processing marine vegetation, while others evolved filter feeding apparatus for straining microscopic plants from the water. The predatory marine reptiles that hunted in these ancient seas were equally impressive. The mosasaurs had evolved into an incredible array of forms, with different species specializing in different types of prey and hunting strategies. Some were fast-swimming pursuit predators that could chase down quick-moving fish in open water. Others were ambush predators that lurked in shallow areas, waiting for unwary prey to venture within striking range. The plesiosaurs had taken marine predation in a completely different direction, developing incredibly long necks that functioned as flexible hunting apparatus. These necks weren't just elongated versions of normal reptile necks. They were sophisticated biomechanical structures with specialized vertebrae, muscles, and neural control systems that allowed for snake-like flexibility and precision movement. The ability to strike quickly and accurately with such an unwieldy appendage required neural processing capabilities that approached those of modern vertebrates. The ammonites that dominated many Cretaceous marine environments had evolved into forms that challenged our understanding of how shells could be constructed and utilized. Some species developed shells with internal structures so complex that they resembled precision-engineered buoyancy control systems. Others evolved shells with elaborate external ornamentation that may have served hydrodynamic, defensive, or display functions. The diversity of ammonite shell forms during the Cretaceous was so great that new species are still being discovered regularly, each representing a unique solution to the challenges of life in ancient seas. The microscopic foundation of these marine ecosystems was equally remarkable. The coccolithophores and other planktonic organisms that formed the base of marine food webs were so abundant that they literally clouded the water, creating conditions of incredible productivity that supported vast numbers of larger organisms. These microscopic plants were so successful that their calcium carbonate shells accumulated in layers hundreds of feet thick, creating the chalk deposits that give the Cretaceous its name and can still be seen in places like the White Cliffs of Dover. The efficiency of these marine ecosystems in cycling nutrients and energy was extraordinary. The warm temperatures and high productivity created conditions where organic matter was rapidly processed and recycled, supporting biomass levels that exceeded anything seen in modern oceans. The burial of organic matter in marine sediments created vast deposits of oil and natural gas that we still exploit today, testament to the incredible productivity of Cretaceous marine life. The volcanic activity that characterized much of the Cretaceous period added another layer of complexity to ecosystem dynamics. While massive eruptions could be locally devastating, they also created new opportunities for colonization and speciation. Volcanic ash provided nutrients that stimulated plant growth, while new volcanic islands created stepping stones for species dispersal across ocean basins. Some species became specialized at exploiting the opportunities created by volcanic disturbance, developing rapid colonization abilities that allowed them to quickly establish populations in newly available habitats. The chemical composition of Cretaceous atmospheres and oceans played crucial roles in supporting the incredible diversity and productivity we've been describing. The high carbon dioxide levels that characterized the greenhouse world had direct effects on plant physiology, generally increasing growth rates and allowing plants to achieve sizes and productivity levels that would be impossible under modern atmospheric conditions. This enhanced plant productivity was one of the key factors that allowed Cretaceous ecosystems to support such enormous biomasses of herbivorous dinosaurs. The chemistry of Cretaceous oceans was also significantly different from modern conditions, with higher levels of dissolved nutrients and different patterns of ocean circulation that supported the incredible marine productivity we've discussed. The lack of polar ice caps meant that ocean circulation patterns were fundamentally different, creating global distribution of warm, nutrient-rich water that supported high productivity in regions that are now cold and relatively barren. The integration of all these factors created environmental conditions that were uniquely favorable for the evolution and maintenance of complex ecosystems. The warm, stable climate provided a benign backdrop that allowed evolutionary processes to fine-tune organisms to extraordinary degrees of specialization. The high productivity of both terrestrial and marine systems provided abundant resources that could support complex food webs with multiple trophic levels. The geographic configuration of continents provided opportunities for both isolation and connection, facilitating speciation while preventing complete fragmentation. The result was a world where life had achieved levels of complexity and integration that may never be equaled again in Earth's history. The ecosystems of the late Cretaceous weren't just collections of species that happened to coexist in the same places. They were integrated biological communities where every component played essential roles in maintaining the stability and function of the whole system. The herbivorous dinosaurs weren't just consumers of plants, they were ecosystem engineers that shaped the very landscapes they inhabited. Their feeding activities created openings in forest canopies that allowed different plant communities to establish themselves. Their movements created game trails that were used by countless other species. Their waste products created nutrient-rich patches that supported specialized plant assemblages. Even their deaths provided resources as massive carcasses could support scavenger communities for extended periods. The predatory dinosaurs weren't just killers. They were population regulators that maintained balance between different herbivorous species and prevented any single group from overexploiting plant resources. Their hunting activities created selection pressures that drove the evolution of defensive strategies in their prey, leading to the incredible diversity of armor, weapons, and escape tactics we see in herbivorous dinosaurs. The flowering plants weren't just passive producers of food and oxygen. They were active participants in complex networks of interaction with animals. They provided nectar and pollen to insect partners in exchange for pollination services. They offered fruits and seeds to vertebrate partners in exchange for seed dispersal. They even engaged in chemical warfare, producing toxins to defend against herbivores while simultaneously evolving detoxification partnerships with specialized feeders. The insects weren't just minor components of the ecosystem. They were essential links in food webs and crucial partners in plant reproduction. Their diversity and abundance created opportunities for specialization that drove the evolution of insectivorous vertebrates. Their pollination services enabled the explosive diversification of flowering plants. Their decomposer activities facilitated nutrient cycling that maintained ecosystem productivity. Even the microorganisms played vital roles that were essential for ecosystem function. Bacteria and fungi decomposed organic matter and cycled nutrients through the system. Symbiotic microorganisms in the guts of herbivorous dinosaurs enabled them to digest plant materials that would otherwise be inedible. Soil microorganisms form partnerships with plant roots that enhance nutrient uptake and plant growth. This level of integration and interdependence created ecosystems of remarkable stability and resilience. The multiple pathways for energy and nutrient flow provided redundancy that could buffer against local disturbances. The complex networks of interaction meant that the loss of individual species could often be compensated by shifts in the roles of other species. The high diversity ensured that there were usually multiple species capable of performing similar ecological functions. The geographic extent of these complex ecosystems was truly global. Similar patterns of diversity and integration can be found in Cretaceous deposits from every continent, suggesting that the entire planet was supporting biological communities of unprecedented sophistication. The warm climate and elevated sea levels had created conditions where complex ecosystems could flourish virtually everywhere on Earth. The evolutionary innovations that emerged from these ecosystems would have profound and lasting impacts on the subsequent history of life. The flowering plants that first diversified during the Cretaceous would go on to dominate terrestrial ecosystems for the next 100 million years, fundamentally shaping the evolution of terrestrial life. The insects that co-evolved with flowering plants would diversify into the most species-rich group of organisms on Earth. The birds that evolved from dinosaurian ancestors would survive the coming catastrophe and eventually occupy ecological roles around the globe. Even the mammals, though still small and relatively inconspicuous during the Cretaceous, were developing many of the physiological and behavioral innovations that would allow them to dominate terrestrial ecosystems after the dinosaurs disappeared. The placental reproductive system, sophisticated sensory capabilities, and complex social behaviors that characterize modern mammals were all being refined during the Cretaceous period. The marine innovations of the Cretaceous were equally influential. The modern groups of planktonic organisms that first appeared during this time would go on to form the foundation of marine food webs for the rest of Earth's history. The evolutionary experiments in marine reptile body plans would influence the later evolution of marine mammals. Even the shell-building innovations of marine invertebrates would persist and diversify in post-Cretaceous seas. The climate regulatory mechanisms that operated during the Cretaceous also had lasting impacts. The biological carbon pump that operated in Cretaceous oceans established patterns of carbon cycling that continue to influence global climate today. The massive burial of organic matter during the Cretaceous created the fossil fuel deposits that power our modern industrial civilization. The weathering processes that operated under greenhouse conditions established geochemical cycles that continue to operate today. But perhaps most importantly, the Cretaceous period demonstrated the incredible potential of life to create complex integrated systems given sufficient time and stable environmental conditions. The ecosystem that flourished during this time represent peaks of biological achievement that continue to inspire wonder and provide insights into the fundamental principles that govern the organization of life on Earth. The sophistication of Cretaceous ecosystems also reveals the fragility that can accompany complexity. The intricate networks of interdependence that provided stability under normal conditions could become vulnerabilities when faced with unprecedented environmental stress. The specialization that allowed species to exploit specific resources efficiently could become a liability when those resources disappeared. The long generation times of large organisms that had allowed for fine evolutionary tuning could prevent rapid adaptation to changing conditions. As we stand at the threshold of exploring the dramatic end of this golden age, we must remember that what we're about to witness wasn't just the extinction of individual species or even entire groups like non-avian dinosaurs. It was the collapse of entire ways of organizing life on Earth, the destruction of biological experiments in complexity and integration that had taken tens of millions of years to develop. The forces that were about to be unleashed would test the limits of ecosystem resilience and reveal both the incredible robustness and the ultimate vulnerability of even the most sophisticated biological communities. The story of how the magnificent world of the Cretaceous came to its sudden end and what emerged from the ashes of that destruction represents one of the most dramatic chapters in the entire history of life on Earth. But even as we prepare to explore that catastrophic transition, we must not lose sight of the fundamental message of the Cretaceous period. This was a time when life pushed the boundaries of what was possible and created ecosystems of breathtaking beauty and sophistication. It was a demonstration of the incredible creativity and adaptability of life itself, showing us what can be achieved when evolutionary processes are given sufficient time and favorable conditions to work their magic. The legacy of the Cretaceous continues to surround us today. Every flower that blooms maintains partnerships with insects that were first forged in Cretaceous forests. Every bird that flies overhead carries within its genes the heritage of the feathered dinosaurs that soared through Cretaceous skies. Every drop of oil that powers our civilization represents the fossilized remains of organisms that lived and died in Cretaceous seas. Understanding the Cretaceous period helps us appreciate not just the incredible diversity of prehistoric life, but the amazing potential of life itself. It shows us what Earth was capable of producing under optimal conditions and provides a benchmark against which we can measure both the achievements and the limitations of modern ecosystems. The story of the Cretaceous is ultimately a story of biological triumph, a testament to the incredible creativity and resilience of life in the face of environmental challenges and opportunities. Even though this golden age was destined to end in catastrophe, the innovations and achievements of Cretaceous life would persist and influence the course of evolution for hundreds of millions of years to come. As we prepare to witness the dramatic conclusion of this remarkable chapter in Earth's history, we carry with us a deeper appreciation for the incredible complexity and beauty that characterized the Cretaceous world. It truly was the pinnacle of dinosaur evolution, but more than that, it was a pinnacle of biological achievement itself, a time when life on Earth reached heights of sophistication and diversity that continue to inspire wonder and amazement today. The magnificent ecosystems that we've been exploring were about to face their ultimate test, a trial by fire and ice that would determine which innovations would survive to shape the future and which would be lost forever in the geological record. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic transitions in the history of life, a transition that would end one chapter of evolution and begin another, forever changing the trajectory of life on our planet. The intricate tapestry of late Cretaceous life was woven from countless threads, each representing evolutionary innovations that had been refined across millions of years. These weren't just random collections of spectacular creatures sharing the same planet. They were integrated biological communities where every organism, from the tiniest bacteria to the most colossal sauropods, played specific roles in maintaining the delicate balance that allowed such extraordinary diversity to flourish. Or consider the remarkable symbiotic relationships that bound these ancient ecosystems together. The massive herbivorous dinosaurs that dominated terrestrial landscapes weren't just consumers of plant material, they were living fermentation factories, their enormous gut chambers hosting complex communities of microorganisms that could break down cellulose and extract nutrients from plant tissues that would be inedible to most other animals. These microscopic partners were as essential to dinosaur success as their impressive size or defensive armor. The waste products of these digestive partnerships created nutrient-rich deposits that transformed local soil chemistry. Plants growing in these fertilized patches often develop different characteristics than their counterparts in less enriched areas, creating patchwork landscapes of varying vegetation types. Some plant species may have become dependent on these periodic nutrient pulses, timing their growth cycles to coincide with the predictable movements of dinosaur herds. The relationships extended far beyond simple digestion, however. Many flowering plants had evolved sophisticated chemical communication systems that allowed them to respond to herbivore pressure. When attacked by plant-eating dinosaurs, some species could rapidly produce toxins or alter their nutritional content to become less palatable. Others developed the ability to release chemical signals that attracted predatory dinosaurs to the area, essentially recruiting bodyguards to protect them from herbivorous threats. These chemical warfare systems created evolutionary arms races of incredible sophistication. Herbivorous dinosaurs developed increasingly efficient detoxification systems, allowing them to consume plants that would be lethal to other animals. Some species may have deliberately sought out mildly toxic plants, using their chemical compounds as natural medicine to treat parasites or other ailments. The co-evolutionary dance between plants and their dinosaurian consumers drove both groups to levels of biochemical complexity that rival anything seen in modern ecosystems. The pollination networks that connected flowering plants with their insect partners were equally intricate. Unlike the relatively simple wind pollination strategies of earlier plant groups, flowering plants had evolved elaborate partnerships with specific insect species. Some flowers were perfectly sized and shaped to accommodate particular types of beetles or flies, while others produced nectar with chemical compositions that attracted only certain species. These partnerships weren't just beneficial for the plants involved. The insects that participated in pollination networks often gained exclusive access to high-energy food sources, allowing them to support larger populations and more complex life cycles. Some species developed specialized body parts for collecting and transporting pollen, while others evolved sophisticated sensory systems for locating their preferred flower types across vast landscapes. The seasonal timing of these relationships was precisely choreographed. Plants had to coordinate their flowering periods with the life cycles of their insect partners, while insects had to time their emergence and reproductive activities to coincide with peak flower availability. This biological clockwork required remarkable precision, with environmental cues triggering cascades of developmental and behavioral responses that had been fine-tuned over millions of years. The complexity of these pollination networks meant that the extinction of a single insect species could have ripple effects throughout entire plant communities. Similarly, the loss of particular plant species could trigger collapses in insect populations that depended on their specialized resources. This interdependence created both stability and vulnerability, allowing ecosystems to function with remarkable efficiency while making them susceptible to cascading failures when key species were removed. The aquatic dimensions of these ecosystems were equally sophisticated and interconnected. The extensive river systems that drained Cretaceous continents weren't just transportation corridors for water and sediment. They were biological highways that connected distant terrestrial ecosystems and facilitated the exchange of nutrients, organisms, and genetic material across vast geographical distances. Many dinosaur species appear to have been regular visitors to aquatic environments, not just for drinking water, but for accessing specialized food resources. Some may have fed on aquatic plants that provided essential nutrients unavailable in terrestrial vegetation. Others may have hunted for fish, amphibians, or aquatic invertebrates that supplemented their primarily terrestrial diets. The discovery of dinosaur remains with fish scales and other aquatic prey items in their stomach. Content suggests that these cross-habitat feeding relationships were common and important. The seasonal flooding patterns that characterized many Cretaceous river systems created dynamic habitat mosaics that supported incredible biodiversity. During flood seasons, vast areas of terrestrial habitat would be temporarily submerged, creating shallow wetlands that served as nurseries for countless aquatic species. When floodwaters receded, these areas would be left enriched with nutrients and organic matter, supporting explosive growth of terrestrial vegetation. These flood pulse ecosystems supported unique assemblages of organisms that were adapted to exploit the opportunities created by periodic inundation. Some plants developed rapid growth strategies that allowed them to complete their life cycles during brief periods of optimal conditions. Others evolved seed dispersal mechanisms that took advantage of floodwaters to colonize new areas. Many animals timed their reproductive cycles to coincide with flood periods when food resources were most abundant. The boundaries between aquatic and terrestrial habitats were remarkably fluid during the Cretaceous. High global sea levels meant that most continental areas were never far from bodies of water, creating extensive networks of wetlands, estuaries, and shallow seas that supported organisms adapted to both realms. These transitional environments were hotspots of evolutionary innovation, where species experimented with new ways of exploiting resources from multiple habitat types. Some of the most remarkable examples with elongated skull spinosaurids were perhaps adaptations that allowed them to exploit both terrestrial and aquatic resources. The dinosaurs became semi-aquatic specialists, developing perfectly adapted for catching fish, eels, and specialized teeth that were while retaining powerful limbs and claws that made them formidable terrestrial predators. These dinosaurs represent some of the most sophisticated examples of ecological versatility in the entire fossil record. The marine ecosystems of the late Cretaceous were reaching their own peaks of complexity and productivity. The warm, shallow seas that covered much of the continental shelves supported marine communities of unprecedented diversity. These weren't just scaled-up versions of modern marine ecosystems, but fundamentally different biological systems adapted to the unique environmental conditions of the greenhouse world. The base of these marine food webs was dominated by microscopic organisms that were far more abundant and diverse than their modern counterparts. Coccolithophores and other planktonic species formed massive blooms that could extend productivity that supported vast numbers of larger organisms for thousands of square kilometers, creating conditions of incredible. These microscopic plants were so successful that their calcium carbonate shells accumulated in layers that eventually became the chalk formations that give the Cretaceous its name. The herbivorous marine reptiles that fed on these planktonic communities were unlike anything alive today. Some had evolved filter-feeding apparatus, similar to modern baleen whales, using specialized structures to strain microscopic organisms from the water. Others had developed more active feeding strategies, using their powerful swimming abilities to pursue and capture schooling prey. The diversity of feeding strategies among marine herbivores was remarkable, with different species exploiting different components of the planktonic community. The predatory marine reptiles were equally diverse and sophisticated. Mosasaurs had evolved into an incredible array of forms, with different species specialized for hunting in different marine environments and targeting different types of prey. Some were fast-swimming pursuit predators that hunted in open water, while others were ambush predators that lurked in coastal shallows. Still others were deep-diving specialists that could descend to crushing depths in pursuit of deep-water prey. The plesiosaurs had taken marine predation in completely different directions, developing body plans that had no modern analogs. The long-necked forms weren't just elongated versions of typical marine reptiles, but sophisticated predators with flexible necks that functioned as precision hunting instruments. The control systems required to manipulate these unwieldy appendages with accuracy and speed were remarkably advanced, requiring neural processing capabilities that approached those of modern marine mammals. The ammonites that dominated many Cretaceous marine environments had evolved shell architectures of stunning complexity and beauty. Some species developed shells with internal chambers, so precisely engineered that they functioned as sophisticated buoyancy control systems, allowing the animals to adjust their position in the water column with remarkable precision. Others evolved shells with elaborate external ornamentation that may have served hydrodynamic, defensive, or display functions. The diversity of ammonite shell forms during the late Cretaceous was extraordinary, with species experimenting with coiling patterns, surface textures, and internal structures that challenged every conventional understanding of how shells could be constructed and utilized. Some developed partially uncoiled shells that resembled springs or corkscrews, while others created shells with such complex geometries that they looked more like abstract sculptures than functional homes for living animals. These experimental shell designs weren't evolutionary dead ends or mistakes, but successful solutions to specific ecological challenges. Each bizarre form represented a tested and refined approach to life in ancient seas, whether it was achieving optimal swimming dynamics, avoiding predation, or exploiting particular food resources. The fact that such diverse forms could coexist in the same marine environments speaks to the incredible productivity and resource abundance of Cretaceous seas. The integration of marine and terrestrial ecosystems reached unprecedented levels during the late Cretaceous. The extensive coastal environments created by high sea levels provided vast areas where marine and terrestrial organisms could interact and exchange resources. Many terrestrial animals were regular visitors to coastal environments, while marine organisms often ventured into freshwater systems or even onto land. Pterosaurs were particularly important links between different ecosystem types. These magnificent flying reptiles could cover vast distances in relatively short periods, potentially moving nutrients and energy between widely separated environments. Some species were specialized marine fishers that spent most of their time soaring over shallow seas, while others were more terrestrial in their habits, but may have made regular foraging trips to coastal areas. The largest pterosaurs were truly spectacular creatures that pushed the boundaries of what was possible for flying animals. With wingspans that exceeded those of small aircraft, these giants required sophisticated physiological and biomechanical adaptations to achieve and maintain powered flight. Their bones were hollow and filled with air sacs, creating structural frameworks that were both incredibly light and remarkably strong. The flight dynamics of these enormous pterosaurs were probably quite different from those of smaller flying animals. Rather than relying primarily on powered flight, they may have been specialized soarers that used their enormous wings to exploit thermal currents and atmospheric conditions. Their ability to remain aloft for extended periods would have allowed them to cover vast distances while expending minimal energy, potentially connecting ecosystems that were separated by thousands of kilometers. The social behaviors of large pterosaurs may have been equally sophisticated. Evidence suggests that some species gathered in large colonies for breeding, creating temporary concentrations of hundreds or thousands of individuals. These aggregations would have had profound effects on local ecosystems. With massive inputs of nutrients from guano deposits and potential impacts on local prey populations, the terrestrial ecosystems that supported these flying giants were themselves reaching new heights of complexity and integration. The forests of the late Cretaceous were multi-layered communities with distinct zones that supported different assemblages of species. The canopy layer was dominated by large conifers and early flowering trees that created a green ceiling filtering sunlight into complex patterns below. The middle story was perhaps the most dynamic zone, filled with smaller flowering trees that were rapidly diversifying and experimenting with new reproductive strategies. This layer was constantly changing as different species competed for light and space, creating a patchwork of microhabitats that supported incredible diversity of smaller organisms. The flowering activity in this zone was particularly intense, with different species timing their blooming periods to minimize competition for pollinators while maximizing reproductive success. The understory was dominated by ferns, cycads, and early shrubs that were adapted to low-light conditions and specialized in exploiting the resources that filtered down from above. This zone was constantly being reshaped by the activities of larger animals, with tree falls and browsing, creating gaps and clearings that allowed different plant communities to establish themselves. Even the forest floor was a complex ecosystem in its own right, with specialized communities of decomposer organisms that rapidly processed the organic matter that rained down from above. Fungi formed vast underground networks that connected different plants and facilitated the exchange of nutrients across the forest community. Some of these fungal networks may have extended for kilometers, creating communication systems that allowed plants to share resources and coordinate responses to environmental challenges. The herbivorous dinosaurs that fed in these forests had evolved feeding strategies of remarkable sophistication. Many species had developed complex dental arrangements that functioned like living food processors, capable of breaking down the toughest plant materials and extracting maximum nutrition from their food. Some had evolved specialized gut bacteria that could digest plant compounds that would be toxic to other animals. The browsers among herbivorous dinosaurs had developed precise feeding behaviors that allowed them to target specific plant parts at optimal times in their development. Some species may have been specialized seed predators that timed their feeding to coincide with seed production, while others focused on young leaves or flowers that provided higher nutritional value than mature plant tissues. The impact of these feeding activities on plant communities was profound. Herbivorous dinosaurs weren't just passive consumers of vegetation, but active agents of natural selection that shaped the evolution of plant defensive strategies and growth patterns. Plants that could survive dinosaur browsing pressure had significant advantages over those that couldn't, leading to the evolution of increasingly sophisticated defensive mechanisms. Some plants evolved physical defenses like thorns, tough leaves, or toxic compounds that made them unpalatable to herbivores. Others developed growth strategies that allowed them to recover quickly from browsing damage or reproduce before they could be discovered by herbivorous dinosaurs. Still others evolved mutualistic relationships with predatory dinosaurs, essentially bribing them with nectar or other rewards to protect them from herbivorous threats. The predatory dinosaurs that hunted these well-defended herbivores were equally sophisticated in their hunting strategies and social behaviors. Evidence suggests that many species engaged in complex cooperative hunting behaviors that required sophisticated communication and coordination. Some may have developed specialized roles within hunting groups, with different individuals responsible for tracking, herding, or delivering the final attack. The Tyrannosaurs represented the pinnacle of large predator evolution, with massive skulls and bone-crushing jaws that could deliver devastating attacks to even the largest herbivorous dinosaurs. But these weren't simply oversized killing machines. They were precision-engineered predators with sophisticated sensory systems, complex social behaviors, and hunting strategies that had been refined over millions of years of evolution. The smaller predatory dinosaurs were equally impressive in their own ways. The dromaeosaurids had evolved sophisticated pack hunting strategies that allowed them to take down prey much larger than themselves. Their enlarged claws weren't just weapons, but precision instruments that could be deployed with surgical accuracy. Their feathered bodies provided both insulation and display capabilities, suggesting complex social behaviors and communication systems. The intelligence levels of many predatory dinosaurs appear to have been remarkably high. Brain-to-body ratios in some species approached those of modern birds and mammals, suggesting cognitive capabilities that could support complex problem-solving, social learning, and perhaps even rudimentary tool use. The discovery of dinosaur trackways that show evidence of coordinated group movements and strategic positioning suggests that some species were capable of tactical planning and execution. The social structures of dinosaur communities were probably far more complex than previously imagined. Evidence from bone beds and nesting sites suggests that some species lived in multi-generational groups with sophisticated hierarchies and role specialization. Older individuals may have served as repositories of ecological knowledge, teaching younger animals about migration routes, feeding areas, and predator avoidance strategies. The communication systems that bound these social groups together were probably remarkably sophisticated. While we can't directly observe their vocalizations, the structure of dinosaur skulls and respiratory systems suggests that many species were capable of producing complex sounds for both long-distance and close-range communication. Some had elaborate resonating chambers that could amplify low-frequency calls, allowing them to communicate across vast distances. The breeding behaviors of dinosaurs were equally complex, with evidence suggesting that many species engaged in elaborate courtship rituals and competitive displays. The discovery of dinosaur tracks that show evidence of dancing or other ritualized movements suggests that these behavioral displays may have been quite sophisticated. Some species developed elaborate ornamentation specifically for breeding displays, with crests, frills, and other structures that were used to attract mates and establish dominance hierarchies. The nesting behaviors of many dinosaur species were remarkably advanced, with evidence of careful nest construction, precise egg arrangement, and extended parental care. Some species built elaborate nests with sophisticated temperature regulation systems that allowed them to incubate their eggs under optimal conditions. Others appear to have engaged in colonial nesting, with multiple pairs building their nests in close proximity and potentially cooperating in defending their young. The level of parental care exhibited by many dinosaur species was extraordinary. Evidence suggests that some species continued to care for their offspring long after hatching, feeding them, protecting them from predators, and teaching them essential survival skills. This extended parental investment required high levels of cognitive ability and social organization, suggesting that dinosaur communities were far more sophisticated than previously believed. The migration patterns that characterized many dinosaur species added another layer of complexity to ecosystem organization. These weren't simple movements between feeding areas, but sophisticated journeys that connected distant ecosystems and facilitated the flow of genetic material across continental landscapes. Some species may have undertaken migrations that spanned thousands of kilometers, following seasonal changes in resource availability and creating temporary concentrations of incredible biomass. The timing and coordination of these migrations required remarkable precision. Different species had to coordinate their movements to avoid competition while taking advantage of optimal conditions. The environmental cues that triggered migration behavior had been calibrated over millions of years of natural selection, creating biological clockwork of extraordinary accuracy. The ecological impacts of these migrations were profound. The temporary concentration of enormous numbers of large animals created resource pulses that rippled through entire ecosystems. Predators and scavengers learned to anticipate these movements, concentrating their activities along migration routes. Plants evolved to take advantage of the massive nutrient inputs provided by passing herds, timing their growth and reproductive cycles to coincide with migration periods. The diseases and parasites that affected dinosaur populations added another dimension of complexity to ecosystem dynamics. The close proximity of many species during migration periods and at resource concentration points would have facilitated the transmission of pathogens. Some diseases may have played important roles in regulating population sizes and maintaining ecological balance between different species. However, the high biodiversity of Cretaceous ecosystems may have also provided natural buffers against catastrophic disease outbreaks. The presence of multiple species filling similar ecological roles meant that if one species was severely affected by disease, others could potentially compensate for its ecological functions. This redundancy may have been one of the factors that contributed to the remarkable stability of Cretaceous ecosystems over geological timescales. The evolutionary pressures operating in these complex ecosystems were intense and multifaceted. Species weren't just adapting to their physical environment, but to a constantly changing biological environment, shaped by the activities of countless other organisms. This created ongoing evolutionary arms races where different groups were constantly developing new strategies to gain advantages over their competitors, predators, or prey. The result was a world of incredible biological innovation, where life was constantly pushing the boundaries of what was possible. The morphological diversity of Cretaceous organisms was extraordinary, with species experimenting with body plans, feeding strategies, and behavioral adaptations that had never been tried before. Some of these experiments were so successful that they established evolutionary patterns that persist to this day, while others represented unique solutions to ecological challenges that would never be seen again. The climate stability of the Cretaceous greenhouse world provided the perfect backdrop for this evolutionary experimentation. Unlike periods of rapid environmental change that favor generalists and opportunists, the long-term stability of Cretaceous conditions rewarded specialization and fine-tuning. Species could afford to invest in elaborate ornamental features, complex behaviors, and highly specialized ecological roles because they didn't need to constantly adapt to changing environmental conditions. The Cretaceous period stands as nature's greatest masterpiece, a testament to what life can achieve when given optimal conditions and sufficient time to flourish. For nearly 80 million years, Earth supported ecosystems of breathtaking complexity and beauty that may never be equaled again. From the feathered giants that ruled terrestrial landscapes to the marine reptiles that dominated ancient seas, from the explosive diversification of flowering plants to the intricate partnerships between insects and their botanical hosts, This was truly life's golden age. As we prepare to explore the catastrophic events that brought this magnificent world to its dramatic end, in our next episode, we're left with a profound appreciation for the incredible creativity and resilience of life itself. The innovations forged during the Cretaceous continue to shape our world today, living on in every bird that flies, every flower that blooms, and every drop of fossil